Okay, we'll call the special council meeting to order. And as you recall, it was back in June that we're asking for a report to come from our clerk's division, legislative services rather, and to deal with meeting efficiency. And so this is their best effort at it. And we will, even though it says approved, I think there probably is some desire to hold off on final approval of this. And just talking to Councillor Davey. So, Councillor Davey, do you want to not bring forward the resolution right now, but just indicate what your amendment would be to this?
Certainly. I mentioned earlier in agenda setting, but I think it was lost. I think we definitely need some time to consider anything that comes out of this. So I would be adding, when it comes time, that we approve this in principle, but refer it to the special council meeting on January 13th for final approval. So essentially, I think the important thing here is that we do get the votes on the table to see where everyone lies on this, but that we do have time to think about it until then. Okay, so when we come to dealing with the motion, I thought it was important to say that right up front. Councillor Gazzola?
Yes.
We're not dealing with the report yet. We're not dealing with the report yet.
No, but I had along the same thoughts, only my thoughts were a little different in that this is fine to table this report, but these are decisions that a new council should be making. I don't believe that this old council should be bringing all of these things in at the end, at the 11th hour of our term. I think it's fine to put these things out so that anyone that's thinking of running for office in the future would know about them, but I think it's wrong at this point for the existing council to do this. I think it should be something that is left up to a new council. Okay, and we can have that debate and discussion after we deal with the items. There will be one delegation to this, but Colin will present the report at this time, and then we'll hear from the one delegation and then go into the report in some detail, or we can also deal with the matter that Councillor Gazzola has raised at that point as well. Colin?
Thank you very much. At the June 10th council meeting, direction was given to staff to undertake a review of the city's existing meeting procedures and report back with suggested measures that could be implemented to provide for a more effective meeting process. Accordingly, Legislative Services staff undertook an investigation of procedures that are currently being utilized by municipalities across the province. The result is 23 recommendations that are aimed at further enhancing meeting effectiveness. Through an examination of the other procedural bylaws, it was identified that there is no single solution to enhance meeting effectiveness. Rather, a multi-pronged approach, like the one being recommended, would most likely foster a greater chance for success. It's important to note that a number of the proposals are interrelated, and therefore a piecemeal approach to their implementation may not yield any noticeable improvements. In 2012, a total of 61.25 hours were spent in council meetings. This does not include time at standing committees or in caucus. This is compared to 44.43 hours that were spent in 2011. In 2011, the average council meeting lasted just under 3 hours. In 2012, this increased to over 4. To date, for 2013, council meetings are averaging approximately 3 hours, 16 minutes. From 2001 to 2011, there were just 3 instances where council had to pass a motion to go past midnight. There were 6 in 2012. Now, this does not include some of the special planning and strategic committee meetings, which also went past midnight. In 2012, members of council spent approximately 150 hours in standing committee meetings. With a cumulative average of 10 hours, 13 minutes spent discussing each item on each meeting day. Now, those figures do not take into account the amount of time that would have been spent at special council meetings or in caucus meetings on standing committee days. Over 20 procedural bylaws were reviewed as a part of this process, as well as the rules that govern debate for the provincial legislature. During that review, where possible, meeting statistics were gathered, and the chart shown on the screen shows a comparison of 10 large urban municipalities. The average composition of the councils of those municipalities is 11 members, and it was identified that overall they had an average council meeting time of a little over 2.5 hours. There are a number of proposals being put forward, and this presentation will give a high-level review of some of the major themes that are being addressed. One of the proposals is an accelerated standing committee agenda publication process. The current process, as depicted in the calendar on the upper left-hand side of your screen, shows that members of council currently only have approximately 5 days to review circulated material. This can lead subsequently to significant amount of time being spent at a committee meeting with with questions of clarification or requests for additional information from staff. It is being recommended that standing committee agendas be published on the city's website 10 days prior to the meeting, with hard copies to be circulated no later than 6 days prior to the meeting date. This will then double the amount of time that members of the council, as well as the public, have to review agendas and reports. Given this additional time frame, it is also proposed that questions of clarification, or where the answer to a question is conveyed in the circulated materials, the chair of the meeting will deem those to be out of order. As demonstrated during the 2 public consultation sessions held last April, with regards to delegation, it comes down to a matter of how many people does council want to feasibly hear from at a given meeting. The key message of the chart is that the greater the amount of time given per delegation, the fewer the number of people that can be feasibly heard from at a given meeting. The proposals that are being put forward are modeled after those that were used during the public consultation session, which enabled 48 people to address council in a little over 3.5 hours. Now that time doesn't include the hour that was spent with the OLG. Currently, delegations are permitted to register to speak up until just prior to the start of a meeting. As shown here, the majority of municipalities that were surveyed as a part of this project do not permit walk-in delegations, and it is proposed that a similar provision be enacted with the City of Kitchener. It should be noted this would not apply to any legislative public hearings where delegations are entitled to register at the meeting. So those being the Planning Strategic Initiative Committee meetings where there's public planning hearing, or advertised fees and charges meetings. With the proposed changes to the agenda distribution timeframe, members of the public will have twice the amount of time to review agenda material prior to a standing committee meeting. Therefore, if a person were to attend a standing committee meeting at the last minute and request to register, they would be offered an opportunity to register for the next subsequent council meeting where the matter is being considered. Also, staff is currently investigating the best techniques that could be employed to provide for written comments to be submitted for those persons, which can then be circulated to council and ahead of the council meeting. People will still have 5 business days to register as a delegation for any subsequent council meetings, so giving them a total of 15 days to review the material and sign up as a delegation, where currently they're only allocated approximately 5. Knowing in advance that delegations have registered for an item would provide an opportunity to ensure that appropriate staff are in attendance to respond to any questions that may arise as a result of that delegation, and reduce the likelihood of a matter being deferred to a later date. This is a standard process by which most parliamentary bodies utilize to deal with items on their agenda. It is proposed that each member of council be given a chance to ask 2 questions prior to an opportunity being given to any member to ask a subsequent question. This will ensure an equal opportunity is provided to ask questions and provides a more equitable voice to each member of council. This is also similar to the process that was utilized as part of the OLG public consultation. in which the first hour of the first public consultation meeting was dedicated to the OLG, the first 10 minutes of which were utilized by the OLG as part of a presentation. The remaining 50 minutes were then allocated for questions of the delegation. Each member of council was given 5 minutes to ask questions, and that time included the amount of time it took to receive a response from the OLG. During that process, no member of council was enabled to ask a second question before everyone was given the opportunity to ask the first question. Within that 50 minutes, there was enough time for every member of council to ask their initial question, as well as time was remaining afterwards for several members to ask additional follow-up questions. In addition, it's proposed that once everyone has been afforded an opportunity to ask questions, that no further discussion or debate should occur until a formal written motion has been brought forward for consideration. Section 25.7.6 of the existing procedural bylaws stipulates that all motions must be in writing. Most likely, the staff recommendation at standing committee meetings would provide for this written motion that would be considered. And staff from legislative services would facilitate a process by which the motion would be posted either on the overhead or on the screen above. This will enhance the transparency of what council is considering, as well as add clarity and reduce the likelihood of questions for clarification as to what's being considered by council. Of course, debate on a motion must be germane to the issue at hand. This will help to ensure that the discussion is focused to only those matters that materially move forward the business of the corporation. It's also proposed that amendments should be written, which is in keeping with section 25.7.8 of the existing procedural bylaw. In addition, it's proposed that we discontinue the practice of friendly amendments for any amendment that comes forward which would enact a substantial change to a main motion. So if an amendment proposed to add an entire new clause to a main motion, it is requested that the person would then be required to write out the new clause, and then that could be added either on the overhead, or we could facilitate a means by which it could be sent to the clerk staff at the front desk there and could be posted on the screen. Robert's Rules of Order and other similar procedural guidelines were created as a means of facilitating a more efficient and effective process for handling meetings. In addition, these rules serve to protect all members' rights to debate. They further serve to add clarity to the process, allowing for greater deliberation and informed decision-making. From time to time, amendments to procedural bylaws is prudent to ensure that they are meeting the needs of council and the public. When these proposals were put together, the central theme was to balance the ability to provide a forum for citizen engagement while ensuring that council is making the most effective use of its time in dealing with the matters that materially move forward the business of the corporation. It is suggested that if approved, the proposed measures could be implemented for the February 3rd, 2014 Standing Committee meeting process. In closing, I want to leave you with something conveyed by Fred Dean at the August 26th Council Strategy Session. He indicated that the degree of thoroughness given to a matter does not necessarily relate to the amount of time that is spent debating it, but rather the quality of the discussion that took place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There's one question, but Councilor Gazzo, I'd like to take the delegation and then we go to questions. You okay with that? Okay. Thank you. Mr. Druids.
Good afternoon.
You're welcome, Harold.
I have handouts for council.
You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Yep. And I have copies for so I hope my 5 minutes starts now. Okay, Mr. Mayor and city councilors, my remarks are based on my personal experiences here as a delegate, what other delegates have expressed to me, and my observations around this horseshoe from the public gallery. I trust the request for this report is with correct motivation and not limiting the amount of question anyone councillor may ask. If I was a councillor, I would have additional remarks because I am concerned regarding the power of the person who chairs the meetings. Since I only have 5 minutes, I will make my points immediately. I am concerned, actually, that I am the only delegation here to speak to this matter. I would really like to know how this meeting and subject matter was made known to the public without having to go search on the website. I suggest more input should be allowed by the public. I do want to thank Colin Goodeve for an excellent dialogue we had via phone regarding this documentation. I really like proposal number 1, long overdue. So far, the agenda and reports on the city's website late Thursday afternoons, and it is a real challenge to be a delegate with meaningful content for a meeting that begins at 9 a.m. the following Monday. I really like proposal number 2. When here, I sometimes could not believe when a presenter and the questions from councillors took 45 minutes at the beginning of a meeting discussing a $10,000 grant from the city to the organization. Now, I am not saying discussions are all about the amount of dollars being discussed, but dollars do have some indication of the knowledge required of the grants or the project involved. Item number 4. Number 6, delegations. For most matters, I suggest 5 minutes is for a delegate to get his or her point across is enough time allotted, but I suggest there are issues that are more complex, and a 10-minute presentation is more appropriate, especially when one needs to go into the background information in order that one can make oneself understood as to what is behind the delegate's point. At the present time, I see no flexibility in this, and perhaps when one registers to be a delegate, staff can ask, will you need 5 or 10 minutes? Further, when I read point number 5, presentations, why do they get 10 minutes? This body is to represent and act on the concerns of citizens to help them cut through the bureaucracy. Something is really not correct with this picture. Item number 7, questions to delegation. I suggest 3 questions should be allowed for each councillor for the first round. Some other points not on this report. Depending on what councillors want to say, often several of you go into quiet mode and the public cannot hear what you are saying. Please keep in mind there are people in the galleries and you are not only talking to or with fellow councillors. B, once a delegate is finished and goes back to the gallery, there is no recourse to come back to the podium, especially when a councillor mentions a point a delegate made during the presentation and the councillor states this point in a completely wrong context. If this happens, I suggest after the end of the debate, the delegates be given an opportunity for at least a 2-minute rebuttal and or clarification. D should be C. Delegates should be allowed to speak, and if there are too many for one evening, then set up another evening for delegations to speak, example, casino public input evenings. This is not an all-inclusive listing of my points, but this is all for today's session. I will be glad to answer any questions. I couldn't get into more meat than what I did.
Okay, thank you, Harold. Are there any questions of clarification? We don't want to get into debate with the delegation, but any questions of clarification only? Councillor Fernandez. Councillor Gazzola, I'm just leaving you on there. Is that okay? Okay.
Just one question, Mr. Drewitz. I'm a little bit puzzled by your first paragraph regarding the correct motivation, but also regarding the lack of delegations that are here. Can you address that?
Yeah. Like I say, this body is supposed to represent citizens, and I did have challenges previously, but probably I have some.
Just hang on a second. The microphone went off. No, he was okay in his time. Are you putting it back on?
Because I have some, I think, good relations with some staff members. I have reasonable access, especially when I get new information. But other delegates have said to me some of the points that I make, and I shouldn't make their points for them. They should know about this meeting. And if I were a manager, and I'm not talking throwing stones, but the communication should have been, in my opinion, that I would have gone through the major items that were discussed during the last 2 or 3 years. I would see which delegates came to speak to those issues. To me, that would give some indication of how much interest a delegate has, okay, for his point, her point, or a group of people, okay, and then notify those people that this discussion is up for debate today. And by doing that, then they would know proactively that this is on the City of Kitchener's website, and they could make a presentation.
Are you also suggesting that it might have been prudent to have had this at an evening meeting when the public would have been more available to attend?
I didn't say that specifically, but probably, yeah, that makes sense. Absolute sense. And you know, I mean, there's a lot of things, you know, there are rules and regulations to everything, but, you know, common sense needs to prevail in everything that is done during, for an issue and during debate.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Yaneski?
Yeah, thank you. 2 questions I have for you, Mr. Drewitz. In regard to point 3, where you talk about proposal 2, and you have 45 minutes spent at the beginning of the meeting talking about a $10,000 grant, I'm not too sure how that relates to proposal 2 in the staff report in terms of items and allocation of time. It's noted there. I'm not sure where you're coming from.
Well, I've been here more than once where a presenter has asked for $10,000 from the city, and it was the first item on the agenda. As a side note, I find that most discussions around committees and council, and it's not just the case for this council, it happens quite frequently in other organizations that I deal with, okay? The first items on the agenda get the most point, and then you rush at the end to finish it off. And I think that's part of the chair's responsibility to make sure that things flow in a decent manner. So $10,000 is asked for, and councillors ask questions, and the person is on the stand for 45 minutes. Yet that very same evening, you're talking about, example, the 2012 budget, and you know, 1% of tax is $1 million, and that delegate gets all of 10 minutes at the podium, including presenting as a delegate, which is only allowed 5, and then 5 minutes of questions. It doesn't make any sense to me. Am I making myself clear?
Well, yeah, so are you implying that maybe the bigger the dollar value item that's on the agenda, the more time you get to speak? Or more discussion amongst council?
No, and I was careful not to make that statement, but I'm saying I don't really understand, from my point of view, okay, why it takes 45 minutes of a presentation and question and answer session from councillors to the presenter in order to decide on whether or not the city should give a $10,000 grant. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. The other question I have pertains to almost your last item in regard to making a presentation, and I know it happened to you once or twice, where you made your presentation, there's debate, discussions, and there was some maybe misinformation or something that you wanted to have another opportunity to provide a clarification. How would we know as to whether you wish to provide a rebuttal or a clarification? How do we do that? I mean, we have a procedure that we follow here, but I mean, do you have to put up
I
your hand, or-
understand, and more than once, on more than one meeting, councilors have said around the table, the delegate said, okay? That's how you would know. And you know something? In several cases, I'll give you the May 27th committee meeting for an example on the natural gas issue. At that meeting, several councilors said the delegate said. The delegate did not say, and by the way, yeah, I was a delegate. I did not say that. It's what you understood. So if you understood wrong and you quote the delegate said, then I think the delegate has a right to rebuttal. And the reason I say that is when you look at any debate, any political debate or most other debates, okay, whether it's municipal, whether it's provincial, and even federal, and when the Prime Minister is just a candidate running for the majority in the seat in the House of Commons, if any one of those leaders during a leadership debate mentions something that the other leader said, there is a 30 seconds or 1 minute or whatever the parties agree to as to rebuttal. And all I'm saying is quite often, especially now that the meetings are webcast, it's only fair to the delegation that if a councillor says the delegate said, the delegate should have the right to rebut. That's
Okay.
all I'm saying.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
Okay, there are no further questions. Thanks very much, Harold.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, this is questions to Colin, and I would suggest that there's some general comments you wish to make. That would be fine, and then we will go through the report in a little more detail. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have a number of questions that I'm not going to go into today because I'm hopeful that this will be tabled and be discussed at what I consider the proper time. I just have a few general questions that I would like to ask. I want to start. No, I shouldn't even say that. I was going to say it was well prepared.
I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I won't mumble anymore, promise. The first question I have, I'm wondering what is causing, or why this sort of thing is here. Have members of council complained about the number of hours they are putting in and want to put less time in? Is this what is bringing this here?
Colin, you can just leave your microphone on then.
Through your mayor, sir. Staff were requested to bring forward possible changes that could be enacted at the June 10th council meeting to examine how to enhance effectiveness and efficiencies for the meeting process. And that's why this report was brought forward this day.
Okay, I appreciate that, but the question I really have, are you aware of members of council complaining about the amount of time?
Through Mayor Zaire, I probably suggest that it'd be more appropriate to direct towards the other members of council, in that I haven't had any communication that with regards to exact incidences of where meeting times, only just anecdotal things where, after a council meeting, someone might say that, well, that was a long meeting. In looking at the numbers, though, it was indicated that, particularly with respect to 2012,
our times did go from approximately 2.5 hours to over 4 hours, and we did have 6 instances where we went past midnight, which would indicate that there was a definite spike in the amount of time being spent in the council chamber.
Okay, another general type question, and what criteria is used to establish the effectiveness of a meeting? You obviously have some criteria in
Go on.
I would say the effectiveness of a meeting would be a meeting whereby fulsome debate has taken place on a subject matter, and that council has reached either consensus or has reached a decision that represents the will of the majority of members, and that the discussion and debate that took place was directed towards or focused on the matter that was before council, and the council made effective use of its time during the meeting.
Okay, I will leave it at that. I do have some comments that somewhere along the line I would like to make them, but I will leave that to the appropriate time. I just want to make one comment at this point, is that the report came to us without the pages being numbered. And this happens from time to time. It's not a big issue, but we want to be more effective. That would really help, because I was looking for details on page 20, and I don't know if anyone can help me with that.
Good point. Okay, we're dealing with questions only now of a general nature, not the specific recommendations. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so as a general question, so one of the things that can be considered as a contributor to the lengthening of the meetings, possibly because obviously from earlier council of 6 members, and plus the mayor, we went to a total of 11. Was there a change done in 2000 when we initially went from 11 to a 7-member council? Were there any changes to the bylaw for meeting procedures?
Through your mayor, sir, I know that the bylaw has been amended approximately 9 times since 1993, and those have ranged from minor amendments to reflect legislative changes, so any changes that happened in the municipal act would need to be reflected into the procedural bylaw. I'm not aware since my time with the city of any major procedural overhauls to the bylaw.
And that's where my question was leading to, because I do consider this as a major overhaul. That's the way we conduct our meetings. And I want to know when was the last time this was done, so you don't remember. Okay, all right. And the other is, obviously, this, in the way you put out, that it streamlines the process of the meetings. Is it fair to say that putting these controls and measures, some of the recommendations that have been put forward in the report, would contribute to then more challenges as well by the council members, those that feel that they perhaps didn't have appropriate time to formulate a question, or in some cases where part of the report, without going specifics, mentioned in advance of notification for any amendments. Whereas a lot of times I've noticed that it's a moving target as the discussion evolves. Certain things come to light where it's not well advanced thought out that this is the direction that a particular council member may have gone, that may create somewhat of a hurdle.
Through Mayor Zara, I would acknowledge that there will definitely be a bit of a learning curve with respect to the proposals. And as you mentioned, it is a wholesale change in the way the meetings would be handled. However, there are other procedures that are currently in place. So in the case of, say, if an amendment or additional time is needed, a matter could always be deferred to provide that additional time. And also it was thought of that as part of providing the additional, almost doubling the amount of time that materials are available, that a number of the issues of clarification or where additional information may be required could be provided in advance of the meeting, and therefore provide for the additional lead time for preparation for the meeting.
Right, and I agree. And one of the changes of having information well in advance of the reports, that it should give a wholesome time for council members to be able to contact the appropriate staff beforehand. So I do, glad to see that part. One last question. some of the other suggestions that put limit as to the number of questions or the time frame that's allotted to each question. Can that not be delegated by the chairs as well? If a chair sees a question is being repeated, do they not have the authority to interject and say, sorry, this question has already been asked? No need. Please ask something else.
Through Mayor there, the chairs do have the ability to indicate when a question has been repeated, or if if a matter that's being discussed is not germane or is not pertinent to the issue that's before them. So a chair would be able to redirect the committee or the council meeting back on track as to what's being proposed. With respect to assisting in that, the proposal to have the motions written out and formally posted, I feel would provide additional direction and focus to enable the chair to ensure that the discussion is staying on track and staying to what is being debated and discussed.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything you've said, but I'll make my comments after.
Councillor Etherington?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, a couple of questions for Colin. The first one, because I agree with the delegation, Colin, can you tell me if we did anything else other than the city website to communicate the content of this report to the public in order to get them in here to comment on some of what will apply to them as delegations?
Through your Mayor's there, the standard agenda process was followed, so it was posted onto the city's website, as well as we do still have a limited number of hard copies that are produced and circulated. As part of the circulation list included members of the local media as well. And I know that communications, I have had discussions with them, and they were going to be working on a press release following this meeting.
That was going to be my next question. In light of the fact that I would think this would be of interest to the media, then we have not issued any press releases on the content of this report ahead of the meeting?
Through your Mayor's there, the report itself was circulated to the media, as well as being available on the city's website, but with regards to a press release, nothing's been issued to date.
There are two media present today.
Yeah, I know, but there are more media in the city, and they would have been better alerted. Anyway, that's a comment, not a question. Last question, Colin, and this is probably an unfair one to put you in, but do you think if councillors exercised a great deal more self-discipline, there would be no need for these regulations?
Through your Mayor's there, I think the rules of procedure are important to be in place, as they ensure that the rights of all members of council are protected and that everyone has an equal and fair opportunity to participate in debate. And I know that the rules of procedure were enacted originally to ensure that there is a fair and equitable process for all. And so I would say that it's important to have the rules in place, even if you have 11 full parliamentarians who are fully versed in Robert's rules. You'd probably still want to have the rules to fall back on for those anomalies or instances where they might come in useful.
You should be a politician, Colin. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just one quick request. If this is not deferred, I would ask that each of these points, if we vote on them, that they each be voted separately, because I found myself in agreement with half of them and
that's fine.
Against the other. Thank you.
I would have expected that. Councillor Fernandez?
Thank you. The first proposal was talking about the time frame. And it's interesting that this was something I had actually addressed in my first year, moving the ability for reports to be on the website. So I'm glad to see that we're considering even sooner. Will this in any way affect the number of meetings we're actually going to have, or will it still stay with the number of meetings that we have?
Through Mayor's there, the number of meetings would still remain constant. Okay. This would only be applied to standing committee meetings, and so if we tried to do the similar sort of time frame for council meetings, we'd probably end up having to have the council meetings spread out even further, or you might be necessary to reduce the number of meeting cycles just to accommodate the same publication of council agendas at the same time.
Okay. You're just wanting general questions, not anything on the
that's correct.
proposal?
Yep,
Okay.
No individuals yet.
All right. Excuse me. Would you say that the casino, have we ever had a debate or a presentation that was of the intensity that the casino debate was in your time on council as a clerk here, or anything that you can recollect in the records?
Would note through your Mayor Zara, would note the chart that was included as part of the slides. It does depict some of the other meetings that have comparable number of delegations that were in attendance. It is under Proposal 6, which shows there was a special council meeting held on May 26, 2011, where 22 delegations were in attendance, and that was with regard to the LRT. There's been special Planning Strategic Initiative Committee meeting last year where we had 15 delegations attend. The public budget consultation sessions typically have a number of delegations who also are.
Okay, but we really did quite I'm talking specifically on how we dealt with the whole casino issue. We offered two opportunities for delegations to come. Even with the special council meeting on the LRT, it was one night, and we just went through all of the delegations. We really set something completely different with that issue. Have we done that before?
Through Mayor Zare, nothing as unique as the OLG issue. I would think partly that was due to timing, necessitating having to have those two meetings in that close succession. I know there has been a number of other items that council has dealt with in the past where, given that it's come back before council on several occasions at subsequent standing committee or council meetings, so there has been multiple nights or multiple evenings whereby members of the public have been able to speak to the same issue, and like such as the Strasbourg Road matter. We had two special meetings on that, one last November and one this past May. But in terms of the procedural rules that were enacted for the handling of delegations, the OLG matter is unique in my experience at the city.
Just to add to that, while the smoking bylaw change for 2000 was primarily done at the region, but there were, if my memory serves me correctly, there were also meetings and discussions that were at the local level in a similar fashion. And I think Colin is correct in terms of there haven't been many meetings where it was pre-established to have the meetings, but we got to one meeting and realized we needed to have a second or third, and that happened.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting to. I was really getting to that it was a pre-established time frame and delegations, and it was all pre-decided. It wasn't because of what happened at one meeting that another situation, another meeting was necessitated. The other question I have, and although it's not in here, it's something I've been wondering since we've been having our screens available to us, is there any reason why we cannot see the same as what the chair is seeing? In other words, who the list of speakers are and who comes forward next. Is there any reason why we can't have that level of transparency?
Through Mayor Zare, essentially it was the way the system was designed. These screens here are programmed to directly reflect the monitor to the right where Diana's sitting, and so essentially they'll mirror anything that's set up there. And then a unique system was put in place at the chair station to enable them to control the activation of the microphone. So it's more of a limitation with respect to the system rather than not being able to enhance transparency.
Okay, and is there any possibility of that being done?
Staff could investigate what that might be required. We'd have to follow up with the company probably to see if it's feasible.
Okay. I'd like to put that forward, just I think that it's just good
Well,
general
we're getting
practice.
into.
I know, but I
this is-
just,
No, this is questions. Let's come back with recommendations so we don't lose sight of any of them.
all right, I'll save that for a recommendation. I will have comments after.
Okay. Questions yet? Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Just one question. In terms of the proposals, one proposal I was thinking we might see was how other municipalities handle motions to reconsider. Can you just, for council's benefit or committee's benefit, council's benefit, describe the difference and why looking at going to the, I believe the more standard model wasn't included?
Through your mayor, sir. I know at the region, as well as it's a fairly standard provision within inside Robert's Rules, is that a person must vote on the prevailing side of the original motion in order to be entitled to bring forward a motion to reconsider. That type of change was considered when this report was being put together, but it was identified that it wouldn't have or might not necessarily have an impact as to the efficiency or effectiveness of a meeting, so it wasn't incorporated into these proposals.
Okay, and without getting into debate, I guess my concern is if we have a very high-profile issue and there's a vote and we deal with it, then if there's no, I think the reason the rule's in place, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a chance under the changing it around so that someone has to vote opposite way, there's a chance there might be a different result. So I guess my concern then would be if somebody can always bring forward a motion to reconsider, even if there's no one's changed, then we could end up having the same debate all over again. Is that not an issue of efficiency?
Through your mayor, there are the other measures within our existing procedural bylaw that act to limit the number of times a matter can be reconsidered, which should hopefully avoid the situation that you're describing of matters being continually brought forward.
That's fine, thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions or more. In the example that you used of the 7 dates that have the casino nights and the budget and et cetera, LRT, where you have that chart noted that some of the meetings went 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. Are those 7 the worst case scenarios that you picked out?
Through your mayor, those were the most recent ones that we were able to establish where a large number of delegations were attending with respect to a matter coming before council.
Okay. And because I note on there, there's many delegations, 22, 26, 14, 15, and that's a huge turnout to deal with the topic. And those topics were, of course, special topics, exceptional topics that would lead to a large number of delegations. Does the time that you have shown here, the length of the meeting, is that just the time that the delegation spoke, or is that including all the discussion and debate of the entire meeting, plus all the other items on the agenda?
Through your mayor, that with regards to these meetings, they were single-issue meetings. So the special Planning Strategic Initiative Committee, that was held specifically just on Strasser Road. The public budget meeting, I mean, they were coming to speak to different aspects of the budget, but it was still directly related to, so there wasn't any other items on the agenda. And that was the total length of the meetings itself.
Okay, so when you look back at the other meetings that are not these ones, regular council meetings, there may be, as I would see, from being here, 2, 3 delegations, sometimes 5 or 6, and it may be on the same topic or 2 or 3 different topics. But the length of those meetings would maybe be a normal council meeting, and there would be many of those. I'm just wondering whether what the ones that you have shown are really extreme examples of examples of, we went pretty long on some of those.
Through your mayor, I'd refer you to the chart that's included in Appendix A, which depicts the average length of each meeting and the total amount of time that we spent.
That one?
Which I think gives a full picture of the amount of meeting times that we've been taking up. So it would account for
the regular council meetings, as you've indicated, where just 3 to 4 delegations may be attending. And note that since the early part of 2000, in the 2000s, we have gotten we were sort of averaging somewhere between 2 to 2.5 hours. And then in 2011, that grew to almost 3 hours. And in 2012, it exceeded 4 hours for all regular council meetings.
Yeah, and I do notice that from 2001 to 2010, it is very low, or about the same almost every year, except the last 2 years, it's really jumped by an hour or 2 hours. Would that be as a result, in the last 2 years, the increase in the size of council from 7 councillors to 11, and there's more of us speaking, whereby 2010 and back, there's only 7 on council?
I'd refer you to Figure 2 of Appendix A, which has the 10 comparable municipalities. And as shown there, there's the average number of members for those councils is 11. And in some cases, as large as 16 in the case of Hamilton. And the average meeting time for those 10 councils is about 2.5 hours.
No, I appreciate that. Those are other councils, but I'm referring to our council that in the last 2 years.
Councillor Yaneski, that would be, it's applicable for 2011 and 2012. The last 2 columns are for this council alone, with 11 members. The previous ones, you are correct, that was 7, but the last 2 columns are this council alone.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
because
it's 11.
So I'm just asking that because of an increase in the number of councillors, that just lengthens the length of the meeting. There's more questions being asked by more people. Is that
through
is
your
that a
mayor-
rationale reason that would be an increase?
Through your mayor's there, I would once again refer to Figure 2. I mean, there's councils there that have 11 members, 13, 15, 16 members. And so there are a number of voices around those council tables as well. And their meetings are ranging from 2 hours to, 3 hours in length.
I see that, yeah, and I know it's, I really can't comment on those other ones because they're, unless you know what's happening and how the delegations and councillors work, maybe the reasons for that. I have no other questions.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Colin, for your report. I have a couple questions. So one of the questions is, so primarily your research has been based upon what other municipalities and parliamentary rules are in place already throughout Ontario and Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so nothing out of the ordinary here, what you're suggesting then?
Through your mayor's there, nope. The procedures in there are either ones that are standard practice for parliamentary bodies or contained within Robert's Rules of Orders or other such procedural guidelines.
Okay. My other question is, and I'm just wondering, when I'm looking at the meeting minutes, how come we don't equate this to a dollar figure? Because to me, when I see meetings that drag on longer, I see that there should be a dollar value to what these meetings are costing the public.
Through your mayor's there, an exercise of that nature could potentially be undertaken, but it would be difficult. I know that in terms of, say, a consultant who the city might be paying for being here for an extended period of time, we would be able to give you a quantifiable number. However, beyond that, it would be a matter of having to figure the salaries of the persons in attendance, and so that might be difficult to go back and chart back over, but something that could possibly be looked at for future meetings, but it would be a difficult task. So.
Okay, I was just thinking maybe you could average it out somehow, because I think the reality here is...
Just questions right now, Councillor Ioannidis.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, there are no further questions in a general sense. So let's just, at this point in time, or even our current rules of procedure would say we should have the motion on the floor and then debate the motion. and because that's where we are at this point in time. So I think I would like to go that so we know exactly what is being debated. Councillor Davey.
I would bring forward the recommendation with that addition that starting at be approved on the second line in the recommendation, I would add in principle and refer to the special council meeting on January 13th, but I would also ask that these be voted on individually. The proposals on the last 2 pages be voted on individually. And if I could speak to it as well.
Yes, you may.
Okay. It's funny, there's 2 ways of looking at this. Some people might say that it's limiting some form of the democratic process. I have some issues with how we're dealing with delegates, and I'll vote appropriately. At the same time, it's clear in the report that the way that we're doing things now, we're hurting the public input process. I've heard anecdotes of people that came to council or committee with the intention of speaking that left because we cannot stay on time, we can't stay on track. And I think I'm very happy to see this report before us. I think that there are definitely some items in here that I'm not in favor of, especially in terms of restricting delegations, but I think in terms of this council, I think it's clear that we need to be more succinct in our questions and answers, and we also need to be more fair. We need to make sure we balance things out, like allowing all members of council an opportunity to engage, because there's also issues at times where we're running behind time, and the first member of council will ask, and it's good for them for doing their homework, but they'll ask 10, 15 questions, and then the chair rightfully tries to speed things up, and some folks may have questions that they don't even get to at times. So with that in mind, I hope that we can be very clear, approve some of these items here, and then we'll be coming back on the 13th so the public can see which way we're going on that, and we can come back and do final approval on January 13th.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I'm not sure. I want to amend that so that it's deferred to the new council.
Are you referring to, there were 2 ways of deferral, and I wasn't sure what you meant earlier, deferring the entire discussion or deferring the implementation of it?
I don't mind having a discussion on it at this point to let people know what the current members of council, how their feelings are on it, but I would like to see any implementation at all. I would like to see that deferred for the new council to make the decision of what, if they want, and when they want to implement it. Okay. I don't think it's a discussion that that this council should be making a decision on. I think it's fine to be reviewing where we've been and how we might feel we can improve things, but that's as far as it should go. Just to emphasize on the point, I think, is that this is something that really involves, to my way of thinking, transparency. It involves the public. And between now and January, the public are going to have very little opportunity to get involved with this. And there are a lot of changes there that I won't comment on at this point, but I would like to comment on them in the future.
Okay, let's deal with one aspect first.
The other thing I forgot to ask a question that I would like to ask, and that is, if this goes the route that is going to be dealt with by this council, what are the process as far as reconsideration by this council, and what is the process of reconsideration by a new council?
Okay, I'll take a stab at it. First of all, I want to be clear. I'm not necessarily agreeing with the position you're taking, but I think I'm going to try to help you and put together what your amendment would be, if I'm hearing it correctly. That the amendment is to allow the discussion to proceed so that members of the council here are on the record as to where they stand, but that the final approval of the changes be deferred to the 2014-18 council for implementation by that council if they choose. Is that it?
That's very much what I want, yes. That no action be
All right.
taken by this council other than for people to indicate whether...
Okay, so we can, I think we'll hold that.
But I would like this question answered as to if I should happen to lose that
Yeah, okay,
direction.
I'll come back to that, but I really am trying to have some discipline as to how we're going to approach this. Just hang on a second. So that we can deal with that as a separate motion at the beginning of the process, or part of another clause, and we would vote on the clause separately. In terms of, if should that lose, then I'm sorry, I lost sight of your question related to that. Could you come back with me once more?
No, if that loses, I would just like to know what are the processes.
Okay,
Can this-
the reconsideration, yeah. So it would
And
follow our current bylaw, rules of procedure, that yes, it could come back at this council for a reconsideration motion, and we go through that process. It would be entirely up to the pleasure of the next council to deal with it however they wish.
Can it come, at the next council, can it just be brought in? It doesn't have to be brought in by way of a notice of reconsideration?
That's correct.
Yeah. The other question along these lines are, if it were to be reconsidered this council, who can bring the notice of reconsideration in? Is it?
I look to Colin, I think it can be anyone.
Through Mayor, sir, yes. Currently, in accordance with our bylaw, any member of council can bring forward reconsideration.
Thank you.
Councillor Davey, on that point, I'm
Sorry, I just
jumping
want-
in the queue for that one purpose.
Right, just for that, on the deferral, I just want to clarify, if the deferral fails, can the councillor bring forward the deferral motion again on January 13th without motion to reconsider?
Yes, because this is committee only.
This is committee that we're in now. Okay,
All of this has to go back to council for ratification.
okay, thank you.
Through Mayor, sir, just to clarify, this is considered a special council meeting.
You're right. You're right, it is. So actually, I should have not commented that way, so you help us out on that specific question, Colin.
It could be brought forward for reconsideration. So if the motion to defer to the subsequent next term of council, if it was to be voted on at this council meeting and lost, it would require a motion to reconsider to bring it forward again at the subsequent meeting.
Okay, and I think that's an important point for Councillor Gazzola, that if you choose not to defer it now, you could always defer it at the January 13th meeting, but I think that's an important point.
Okay. So if you want to go back and, Councillor Davey, if you want to go back in the queue, you have to put it back on again. That's fine. You were there for the leather list, because I had taken you off. Okay, we're, where were we? This is now, we're dealing with, the motion is on the floor. I want to make that, we're now into the debate of the motion, and if you're going to get into the specific clauses, then we will go through them one by one, rather than, so if you are speaking generally, you can speak now, or if you're speaking on clause 1, speak on clause 1. I think it probably would be on each proposal, you mean? Yeah, we're dealing with both. Yes, well, the only way to do that, of course, is we're not going to vote on each one right now, but we're going to deal with the debate on each one as we go through. Yes, yeah, because we're not going to go back. We're not going to go back onto clause 1 after we've dealt with clause 8. So, Councillor Singh, you are next.
Okay, all right. Well, on proposal 1, I think it's just a comment, not a question. I think this is a long time coming. This was something that this council had asked staff to consider, and I think the small change that we made early on of having the agenda online by Wednesday and before receiving the full package wasn't substantial enough to really allow for what was asked for earlier. So really glad to see that part. So that's it, just a comment.
Okay. On clause 1, Councillor Etherington. I'm going to say proposal 1. Which is, by the way, what I've done is gone through and numbered each of the pages. So if you want to do that as well, just go through and number them, 1 through 19, so we can reference page numbers. Councillor Etherington?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, just some very general comments. I have nothing wrong. I would support Councillor Davies' motion. I have nothing wrong with waiting until January 13th to give the public more notice of this, and I very much believe that the public should have more notice to comment on this. We've got here 22 proposed changes, and I disagree strongly with 10 of them, particularly those that relate to delegates and councillors. I came to City Hall yesterday to sign a memorial book for Mandela, in which I said that he taught us the power of peace and respect, reconciliation in face of disagreement, division, and lack of compassion, among other things, by those in positions of leadership and authority. And we're a long way, a very long way from South Africa and such memorable struggles for democracy. But at the same time, I did think of Mandela when I read this report, and I believe it's a document that was written because of division and constant squabbling and negativity and lack of self-discipline on this council. Now that sounds really precious, but I think that if we all exercise more self-control in our meetings and put aside some of that media grandstanding and I won't name the other, I think we have no need of getting into some of these, which I believe are anti-democratic restrictions. I'd just say one other thing. I am very concerned that the length of the meetings, now this is very personal, when we go to that length of meeting through a day and into the night and sometimes into the early morning, I'm really concerned about the quality of decisions that we're making. I can't cope with that length of time, and I don't know if other people can, so I look forward to this being dealt with in a point-by-point way. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Yeah, I just have some general comments that I wanted to make. I'm not necessarily in favor of deferring to the next council, because I think it's important for people who sit around the horseshoe for a while to make decisions in order to start the council off on the right foot with new procedures in place, so that they can start right away by moving forward in a manner that will be more, in my opinion, will be more effective and efficient. I'm not against waiting until dealing with this on January 13th, but I think it's important for this council having the experience and knowledge to make the decisions, and then there's always the new council. If there's something that's not working for them, they have the opportunity to reverse or make something new that's going to work for them. So I think it's important to have that experience to make this decision. I think some of the new guidelines and proposals that are put in place are really good and will help the effectiveness of our meetings. I think there's been many examples right here in this meeting today after I read the report. I think there's many things that are common sense that we all just need to focus on, but many of the proposals that are in place were broken today. There was many questions that were asked doubly of Colin, and I wasn't even in the room the whole time. And there was questions that were clearly outlined in the report that were asked of staff. And I think those are the types of things that we need to try to start getting away from, because it does take a lot of time and resources. And I think that's one of the pieces Councillor Ioannidis touched on that I was hoping to see in the report. Not that it needs to be an all-encompassing figure, but there definitely is a financial implication when it comes to dealing with the effectiveness of meetings and the efficiency. I think everything requires due process. We need to make sure we vet issues. I'm not trying to suggest we don't do that, but there's definitely things that we can cut out in order to make ourselves a little bit more effective and efficient. So there's a number of the recommendations that I think are great, and I would support today, but I'm willing to hear from the public. I'm also willing to wait until the 13th to discuss it further.
Councillor Glenn Grave.
Thank you very much. I think that it's important for the public to be engaged in this, and therefore I would support a deferral to the next council. Having said that, I would like to go through these one at a time because I think, it's important to signal to staff where we're coming from. And there's a number of these that I think could be implemented, although I support Councillor Gazzola's suggestion that most of them would be deferred to the next council. So there are a number of procedural things that I think could benefit our council during this term. And so it's not a holistic approach, I would say, that we would take as a deferral of everything beyond the January council. I think we should look at everything individually, and therefore I'm not sure if you're going to take every proposal one at a time. Is that the intent?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky, and keep in mind here, you're speaking to clause 1 at the same time as your general comments, because I'm not going to come back to it again. Councillor Yanetsky.
Thank you. I agree with the Councillor Davies' recommendation to defer to January the 13th. I think we need to digest this a little more and have some better discussion at that time. I agree with some of the proposals here, and I disagree with others. And I think we'll debate that through as we go through it, because I think there are some good reasons that we can provide on this. I think that as a result of the increase in number of members of council, in this council, it has certainly generated lengthier meetings, which I think have been healthier, only because there's more debate and there's more input and opinions provided. Granted, it takes longer, and that's just the way the process goes, unfortunately, but it provides for a proper democratic process to allow everybody to speak. I think the public has to be engaged in terms of their input somehow, and I think maybe with the media being here this afternoon, they'll probably have some article to bring it to their attention if they haven't known about this otherwise. So then they may be appearing at this to provide their input as well. I'm looking at the length of the council meetings, and even though there has been the longer ones this past year or two compared to previous years, I don't see that as an anomaly at all. I never felt that council meetings were longer, in my opinion. We just went through the process of having everybody speak, and not that the quality of the discussions and issues that were there were all relevant and important to the people who were there to discuss them. And I think each meeting of council that we had was always a good meeting. But the length of the meetings, I don't think is really that concerned when I think about the committee meetings that we have a week before, whether planning, strategic, finance, community services, and we start some of those 10 o'clock in the morning and we'll keep going through till 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and end up being 10, 12-hour meetings. So when I look at a council meeting of 4 or 5 hours, I think that's pretty good compared to 12-hour meetings with committee days.
Just to be aware that when we're talking about all of these proposals that are in here, they apply equally to committee meetings. So Councillor Yanetsky's comment is correct in that the hours are there for the council meetings only. However, the procedures that are being proposed here apply to both committee meetings and council. Councillor Fernandez.
I guess I'm a little bit puzzled. I thought we were going to take each one of these proposals individually, and now we're going into general comments, I'm not sure what to do here.
I said at the beginning that you can make some general comments and also deal with item number 1, but we're not going to go with the second round on item number 1 when we...
I'm going to make comments on number 1, but my general comments I will leave until I'm done commenting on each proposal.
All right.
So number 1, absolutely thrilled to see this as a suggestion. Like I said earlier, it was a suggestion I made right in the get-go in my first year in office. So I'm glad that we recognize how important it is that the public has an opportunity to see as well as council, so that we have a chance to ask the questions. But the other, my next comment will go to the next proposal.
Okay. Councillor Ioannidis. I think we can, if we, I appreciate what you just said, Councillor Fernandez. If we refrain from going in and making comments on the others, we'll get around this and through this a lot faster that way. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, I think this is good that this is here. I think I don't think this is an anomaly of of adding more counselors to the table, why our meetings are going a little bit longer. I think the reality is here that I think it's our fiduciary responsibility as counselors to understand the material that is given to us and to ask the proper questions prior to meetings. And it's okay to ask questions. That's not the issue. But I think when questions are asked and asked and asked, and when they're in the reports, that's not solving any problems or saving any efficiencies. And the reality is, I see this. We all came on the premise in council to reduce red tape. Well, this is another red tape that we should eliminate in some portion. And I'm all forward to looking at creating more meeting efficiencies, and whatever the proposals in here, I think will help benefit the public as well. And as far as on item number 1, I think that is a long time coming, and it's something that we as council, as new council members, have asked from the beginning. And it's hopefully this will alleviate some of the issues that delegations have in their concerns about not having enough time, which I hope that will be the case. But overall, I think this information that's been given in the report is pretty thorough, and it's pretty scientific for the most part, and well, not the most part, I think for all of it. So I think it's important that I don't think it's an anomaly when we have consent items in here that is question and question and question, and then everyone just says yes to them. Like, it just, that doesn't make sense to me, because they're just items that should be put forward and voted on. So I think this is a long time coming.
Councillor Galloway-Selat.
Yes, sorry, I will focus on proposal number 1, and if you'll indulge me, I have a quick question of staff. With regards to the report, is it to have number 1 implemented? Sorry, in the report, I believe I read that to have that implemented, we could do it by February, whatever the date was in February. Sorry, I don't have that off the top of my head. Only if we approve that now. Would that be accurate?
Through your Mayor, sir. Ideally, if it's approved now, and that's just for accommodating the staff members who would be required to get their reports to us ahead of time. If we can provide them with as much advance notice as possible, that their time frames for supplying the reports to the February 3rd meeting, that they would essentially have a week less to work on their projects than they might have anticipated. But if I'd refer to Jeff or Dan to correct me with regards to those projects, if whether or not the timing on those might be contingent.
Mr. Wilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we can implement this for the first meeting in February, I think, and we'll proactively get the message out in advance. What it might mean is that some items might not be ready for that meeting, and those particular items would be pushed off by 3 weeks. But we can start the process and bring it in place for the committee meetings in February.
But is that, sorry, just to be clear, is that only if we approve that today, or if we approve that January 13th? That's where I'm coming from, because I'm thinking, and I don't know for sure, but I'm thinking maybe there is the will around the horseshoe today to approve number 1, so we can get that process started, and then move forward as has been outlined with the rest, January 13th.
So through the Mayor, I think we would take our cues from the discussion today, and if it looks like there's solid support for number 1 going from today, we can start to message that, even though it won't be formally decided on until January 13th.
Okay.
Or I could propose an amendment that we approve it today, number 1 only.
You could when we came down to that. Yes,
Okay.
you could.
Thank you.
Regardless of whether it's the February whatever date it is or not, I think there will end up being some transitionary period here, because just because of whatever reports are in the works right now, some of the work may not be completed. Okay, Councillor Galloway?
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm going along here with just a quick comment on number 1, but I have comments on the total picture, which I will see.
That's fine.
As far as number 1's concerned, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with dealing with that immediately. I don't even ask for a week's deferral on that one, because it's something really that affects staff more than it affects anyone around the horseshoe or the public. So I can support dealing with that and dealing with it right away outside of my previous request.
Okay, Councillor Urbanovich.
Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. First of all, just want to thank staff for all the work that was done in putting this together. I think it's a meaningful report and one that is giving us the opportunity to dialogue about both how our council and committee meetings operate, as well as what the opportunities are for citizens to engage with City Hall. And I think any time that we have these discussions and they provide an opportunity to either strengthen our local democracy or improve the level of citizen engagement that we have in our community, it's time well spent. Specifically, in terms of the overall report, there are some things that I agree with here and some that I don't. I like the idea of having additional time that I understand is being proposed for the public to comment on the proposals that are here. I think that's extremely important and would support that. And specifically, as far as number 1 goes, I'm certainly supportive of that. I think it will give time for councillors to better prepare themselves for issues, as well as giving the public that opportunity. And would suggest that we move on that right away so that it can be implemented as soon as possible.
Okay, there are no further speakers on item proposal number 1, so we'll go to proposal number 2. And once again, we'll come back and vote on all of these separately, including the potential amendments that have been discussed. Proposal number 2. This is making sure that the chair keeps within the allotted time. And that when a matter is proposed to be deferred, consideration shall be given to our pending list. Comments? Okay, we've got Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much. I'll make it brief. I do support the idea of a proper agenda setting, and I think that's critical. And sometimes we've given short shrift to some of the items. So I think that's the foundation of this, and therefore I support that. I do think there should be discretion for the chair to add an extra period of time, 10 to 15 minutes, for a period of discussion. But overall, I'm supportive of something that speaks to a proper agenda setting.
I have no further speakers. Well, yep, I do now.
Sorry.
Councillor Fernandez.
I was just rereading it because I think that it's important for us to have a proper agenda setting, but I often think that, and I've said this numerous times, we don't allow enough time for proper discussion. The other concern I have is if we put it to a pending list, will some of these items get bumped too far down the pending list?
I'm sorry, I was
That's okay,
distracted.
I understand.
Can you say, were you asking me a question?
No, I'm just sort of pondering if we have to bump something or we have to defer it if it gets on the pending list, if it will end up deferring it much further down than it should be, or will it be for the next standing committee or the next council meeting?
Good question. I would assume that we would get it on as quickly as possible because they're on a meeting date for a particular purpose. Mm-hmm. Some of them cannot be deferred because they're time sensitive.
Through your mayors there, when we were crafting this proposal, it was mostly considered that the report's pending lists will show a meeting date that could possibly have 10 to 12 hours already on it, and therefore deferring another large item to that same date would overload that date, and then we'd end up having to scramble and reposition things. So where feasible, we would look to deferrals to dates that have some level of availability in terms of timing so that council does have a sufficient amount of time to give consideration to a matter.
Okay. I guess the other question I have is my understanding is when the mayor and the committee chairs and the CAO and the DCOs meet to set up the meetings, that there seems to be a cloak of secrecy around that, and we just sort of get to know about it when it's put on the website. I know we have a list of pending up and coming and pending issues that may be coming forward. But as you've just said, that some of them already are on a very heavily scheduled day. Is there a way that we can have a bit more, the rest of council who are not chairs, have a bit more information on once that agenda is set before it gets put online, that this is roughly the items that we'll be seeing? Is there any way we can do that, or at least have an idea of what's being discussed? Because I realize that we can't have all of council in that, because in those committee and agenda setting meetings, because then we have quorum, and that becomes a problem as well.
You may be referring to, and in fact it is there, the corporate calendar of pending items. While the further out you go on that calendar, the times become a little bit more vague. But the ones that are closer to the top in terms of date already have times attached to them. And not all items are on there, because if they're routine items that simply come forward, they're not going to get onto that list. It's major reports. That's the report you're referring to. No, not that list. No.
Not this list.
No.
Okay, this is the list I was referring to.
No.
That's my understanding.
There is another report. It's available, Colin?
Through your Mayor's Error, it's posted in the O Drive under the corporate calendars. There's the formal corporate report pending list, which is a consolidation of departmental report pending lists. So each department has individual lists that they use to track when projects will be coming forward, or proposed timing for when projects are coming forward. And then a corporate list is created, which draws upon all those departmental lists, and it's available in the O Drive.
Perhaps if you take a look at that, it probably answers your question, because all of the information that we're dealing with comes from that schedule. It's available to members of council.
Okay, well, I didn't even know it was available to members of council, so right. This is brand new information to me in my third year of term.
Yeah.
So that's a problem, obviously. Then that list should have been, or at least an information should be given to council at the very beginning. This is our pending list, and so you at least have an indication that that's there. I keep looking to the unfinished business list, so that I think that's an important fact that needs to be hit.
Councilor Gazzola?
Okay, this is one of the items that I'm hopeful will be deferred, because it does get into the power of the chairs, and I have some concerns with that in the overall report. So I did want to mention, and Councillor Fernandez has discussed that I was hopeful that we could circulate that pending list to everyone. I didn't realize it was at least available to members of council. I don't know why it shouldn't be available to everyone in the community. It's just an idea of things that are coming forward. So to me, that is something that can be done very easily and is informative to everyone, and it just takes a bit of time from staff as to where it's circulated. So, but the other, I would hope we can wait for some time, because it does. I have some concerns with it.
What is on the O Drive goes out for a long time, and it's really speculative with a whole bunch of issues and times, and quite frankly, I think it would be misleading to the public if it went. I don't have a problem with council seeing it, but I think it would be misleading the public to say in May an item is going to come forward, and it's just they're hoping that a report will be done by that time, and then you got people saying, well, why didn't you bring it forward? And it's not a matter of transparency, it's a matter of making sure that the public has good information. Nothing worse than the public having bad information. So, there are no other speakers on this one. I just have a couple of comments. I don't see proposal number 2 as being a power thing. I know that some people will interpret it that way. A chair and a mayor, or whoever is in this chair, is responsible for getting the business of the city completed, and in its most efficient way as possible. And when the agenda setting meeting takes place, we have great debate on how long we should be setting aside for each one. And inevitably, the amount of time that staff has come up with ends up being changed to a greater period of time because we understand that there will be an interest in it. So already it has been extended. And so when there is a critique of the length of time, it's not that it wasn't given due consideration when the agenda-setting meeting was taking place. It's a major part of the discussion that goes on in that meeting. Okay, we'll move to Proposal 3A, and Councillor Galloway-Seelock has just asked that I reference what it is about. And that any reports that are strictly for information shall be placed under the heading on the agenda and shall only be included as a discussion item by a majority vote of the committee. Just for information, that is the way it is done at the region. It seems to work well. It doesn't say that anything can't be brought forward, but there's a majority of a vote taken to move it from consent to discussion item, or to a discussion portion on the agenda. Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, so maybe my question might be redundant then. If you're saying that a particular consent item needs to be moved into discussion by a majority of council, that's how we would be able to ask questions to it?
Yes.
Okay. But if it's lost, then no questions can be asked. And again, it goes to transparency and the ability for the public to see where we stand on a particular item. If it's something germane to our specific ward, if we don't ask a question, then even in a webcast, the public has no idea how we feel as a ward councillor about a particular issue that's coming forward in our... And I mean, a perfect example is when Councillor Galloway-Seelock asked about a midway that was happening at the Sunrise Plaza and whether the public had been made aware of that happening and her concerns to that. So, I mean, we may all have said, well, you know, that's not really an important item, we're not going to put that into the discussion category, but her ward residents needed to know how she felt about that particular issue, especially if they were concerned about it. So it doesn't show transparency. The public needs to be able to see how we, as their representative, feel about a particular issue.
Mr. Chapman, you want to add some information?
Just to clarify, this does not relate to consent items. This is information items only, reports that have no recommendation, so there is no resolution expected. This does not pertain to consent items.
I beg your pardon. I misled you.
Okay. All right. Okay. So if we're talking about information items, if there's no discussion about an information item, so a presentation has been made on an information item. No, you're shaking your head. No.
No. Essentially, these would be reports that are purely for information. No council direction is required. They're listed at the bottom of the agenda. And it's assumed that basically council can clarify in the 10 days prior to a meeting if council members feel that it's important that there be discussion. By motion, that item can be brought forward in time allocated to it. Okay,
I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and I misled you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Consent. All right. So, okay. Then can we do 3B at the same time then?
No.
Okay.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I wanted to point out first that we're not talking about consent items. These are items like we had a couple of weeks ago about our insurance company. I'd like to think about that. I hate to think that if there's a legitimate question, we have to have a first vote of council to get a majority vote. So this is something I'd like 6-8 months to think about.
I'm sorry, didn't get the last part.
This is something I'd like 6 to 8 months to think about.
Okay. No more questions on 3A. So 3B is that the recorded vote shall not be permitted at a standing committee meeting. And I think it's the report is self-explanatory, but I think what Colin has said is that the recorded votes don't have any legal standing on in committee. There's nothing binding of it. So that's the point that's being made here. But there may be differing opinions, including moi. Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think your last comment added clarity to my question. So I'll give credence to that. You know, your statement there but then I'll come to my comment on this, which is that a lot of things that come through committee, if they fail, it doesn't get forwarded to council either, in which case there's a lack of transparency where the public doesn't get to see who was responsible for having turned down a particular item. And that's usually where a recorded vote is asked by members of council who want to ensure that their voices or their opposition or support is outlined by whatever the discussion is in a committee. So I would be very much like, I saw this and honestly I had to shake my head. I'm quite opposed to some of the things out here, but when I saw this, I was very surprised. I think this is one thing that adds a huge level of fog, rather than adding clarity and transparency to the process, which we're trying to do. And I think it would be counterintuitive. So I would be very opposed to this.
Councillor Fernandez.
I can say ditto, but Colin has a comment.
Sorry.
Through Mayor Zero, just if I could offer some clarification as to the background behind this. It was viewed from a procedural standpoint. Staff was tasked with identifying means which could make meetings more efficient and effective, and it was looked at as to do a recorded vote, regardless whether we're using the electronic system or the traditional standing, where then staff has to record into the minutes. It takes time, and so there's time allocation with respect to taking a recorded vote. And given that recorded votes at committee meetings don't have any legal status, that council has the final decision-making authority, it was viewed as a way of saving time or making a meeting more efficient would be to remove the recorded vote process, given the amount of time it takes to undertake that process during a committee meeting. And that was the perspective that staff examined when we were considering this, that it was looked at as a quick win because of the time it takes at a meeting and the lack of legal status.
You have to click yourself back in. Okay, Councillor Singh.
Thank you so much. And I was trying to be efficient and not go to staff for more clarity because I thought the mayor, with what he had said, added that explanation. But now that you responded back, I want to ensure that addition is added as to my comments. The explanation you gave me doesn't come close enough with giving me any type of encouragement of why there should be support or even some remote consideration given to something as this. I think it's rather unfortunate that something like this was even included just to save time.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
Oh, can I finish mine?
Oh, yes, you're
I
up
defer
there.
to Colin.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm quite supportive of what Councillor Singh is saying, and I understand the fact that that the meetings are videoed, but if we just, a number of us do this with our hands, we don't even do this. So if the public is watching, they have no idea on where we have stood or voted on a particular item.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I'm not in favor of this proposal. I quite frankly would like to see every vote taken as being recorded. I appreciate that at a committee meeting it has no legality, so to speak, but it does clearly indicate how a councillor is feeling on a certain issue. And it's quite easy now, I'm finding, to get into the reports of committees so that people can clearly and quite easily see how members of council voted. I know it's been stated that with the streaming, people will be able to see it there, but I think they can see it here easily. I'm in favor of all votes being recorded. In this day and age, the technology should be there, that it's a simple thing to do.
Councillor Urbanovich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I said earlier, that I think it's a great report in the sense that a lot has been considered. As I indicated, there are things that I agree with and things that I don't. This is one that I don't agree with. I mean, at the end of the day, fundamental principle of a democratic local council is the ability for the people that have been duly elected to express their views and be recorded as such in terms of the various issues. And a lot sometimes transpires between a committee day and a council day, when sometimes people even do change their mind and change their mind for valid reason. And I think there's no reason why that shouldn't be recorded, and that series of events being noted appropriately and why they happened the way they did.
Councillor Yanetsky?
Yeah, thank you. I don't agree with going this particular direction. I found that in reviewing minutes, I found it important to look at who voted or what particular position they took, because it's important. Usually at that same time, at committee level, you have a huge number of delegations that are here in attendance, and they're basically here for or against a particular item. It could be split votes in the audience on two sides of a story, but if you vote just with your hand and this is majority carried, they really don't know exactly your position unless they've seen it. But I think it is important that they see it in a recorded vote, that it's shown, and I think it does provide better transparency on that. So I'm not prepared to support this. And in terms of the extra time that it takes to run the electronic version of the vote, I think it's more important of that than to save the extra 30 seconds or so.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you. I would support, I disagree with this because there is a value to the transparency value of a recorded vote, even though it doesn't have legal standing. I don't think that it's going to add that much more time. And really, most of the extra time is in additional discussion around things. So I do think that this is worthwhile to keep, is having recorded votes.
Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm against this as well, but I would point out that the exercise we're going through at the moment is completely unnecessary because we're repeating what each other's saying.
I was about to make a comment that it's now 3:45. We are at 3B of 22 recommendations, so let's keep that in mind. Councillor, okay. We'll move on to Clause 4A, and this, in essence, states that the standing committee report that the chairs bring forward at a council meeting, and this does apply only to the council meeting then, would be brought forward as if they were a consent item, not that you can't pull them out. And if you want to pull one out, then we certainly do that. But that they be dealt with as a unit, and that the items, the 2 or the 20 or the 30 items that are on it, are not necessarily read out, or not read out, and not necessarily summarized. I understand that there are some times when it is appropriate to highlight one or two of them, and that could still be in order. Councillor Davey. Any other comments? Councillor Gazzola.
Just a quick comment. I just want to make it known that silence doesn't mean that we concur with these. When you're dealing with, okay,
No, there's a vote.
Yeah.
There'll be a vote. And we're hearing a vote right now. 4B is a lengthy one, but this deals with a request for a special inquiry, that it be in writing, be signed by the member of council, be received by the clerk no later than noon of the Wednesday preceding the next regular council meeting, and it be printed in full on the agenda. And then there are some various things related to that. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. Could I ask, how is it, this is not speaking to a motion that may be directed by a council member, right?
Sorry, what was the question?
This is not speaking to a motion that would be forwarded by a council member. This is just for a special request. Could you clarify what that would be? Give an example of.
This is actually, this one was taken from the Regional Water Use Procedural Bylaw, and it's a clause that they have. Currently, during a council meeting, we have our question and answer period, and it was identified that during that time, requests might be made to staff which end up resulting in a considerable amount of work or a lengthy staff report being prepared and being circulated. And so this was identified to me as a measure that's implemented by the region, whereby a formal request is made and that council agrees to have staff be directed to do that follow-up report. This was viewed for issues that would require a follow-up, need to have the majority of council agree. If it's a question or something that's raised at the meeting which a member of staff is able to respond to immediately, then those wouldn't relate to this. But this would be an example of where a member of council has requested that staff report back with additional information on a particular topic. And so then, as part of the procedures, at the next subsequent meeting, either Mr. Wilmer or one of the deputy COs, if it's identified that it would take significant resources to have staff look at that information, would report back and make council aware of that, and council will then determine whether or not it is something that it would like staff to invest their time in.
And this is where my confusion came in, because it was my understanding that no one particular council member can direct staff on anything, that it requires the majority of council to give direction. And if a staff report needs to be, I guess, processed and done, that seems to be a fairly major item. Has there been a history? Obviously, a lot of work went into doing this report, because this was asked some time ago. So as a review of the procedures that have been going on over the last couple of years, was it shown that there's a lot of direction given by individual councillors that doesn't go through the proper procedure of full majority, that there's a lot of added work that's being put on staff?
Through your mayors there, it is following the current existing procedures, but I can think of a couple of recent examples. There was a report provided on the senior management hiring, which was created based on a request made during a question and answer period, and that resulted in staff time having to go and investigate previous policies and report back with a report. So there has been instances where additional or further staff work is required, and staff, given the time for when we wanted to report back on that, staff were either taken off other projects or added or asked to assume this work on top of their existing work. And so there is an impact on staff resources. And so this is identified. So then this allows for a process whereby senior management would identify when there is an impact on staff and resources, and then inform council. Then council can determine whether or not they still want to proceed with that report to be created, or if the impact to resources is too great or too lengthy, then they could determine that they may not want staff to proceed.
Okay, and I'm sure there could be a lot of back and forth on this, and I don't want to belabor the topic, especially because I'm not supportive of this, and I'm cognizant of the time already. And I see this almost leading to where staff are asking me to get your support of majority before I send an email to staff asking a question. That's why I asked explicitly, has there been a long history of a lot of work that's being added on to staff time? You commented on a particular case where I just saw it as staff being directed to look at an existing, report that's already been generated, not a new report being done. So anyways, I'll go to my comment. I think I would not be supportive of this at all. I think there was an earlier comment being made that this new council came in strongly opposed to red tape. This is nothing but red tape, and I will not support red tape.
Just for your information, that is identical to what was at the region, and I can think of only one instance in the last year where when it was raised at the council meeting that a report which was asked for by a member of council was not supported by the council as a whole, just one. And in fact, when this is asked for at a meeting, it removes the discretion in my mind and the power, if you wish, of the chair. Because when the questions come up from a member of council and it's taken to staff, quite often I've sat here and say, well, is it reasonable or not? And I have to make a judgment. And this removes that judgment on behalf of the chair. And in fact, it becomes the council's decision as to whether or not that is a reasonable thing to do. And I think in that sense, it is a good item.
I just have a lot of faith in your judgment. That's why.
Councillor Davey.
I just wanted a little bit more clarification on this as well. It seems like it would be a simpler and simpler process, and I think I've done this in the past. If a question comes from committee, I would ask staff if it requires a significant body of work, and at that point we would take a motion then. And if staff doesn't know, then could it just not be deferred to the following council or committee so staff can report that whether or not it requires a significant body of work? Seems
Colin,
like
do you want to comment on that?
seems like a saw-off.
Through Mayor Zaire, that is definitely an approach that could be taken as well. What we've seen with this here is that by asking that the request be put forward in writing, it would remove any potential ambiguity with regards to what the intent is or what the councillor was seeking from staff. And so that way it's definitive and staff can focus their response based on exactly on what councillor is asking for. Because I know at times it may not be 100% clear as to what the request is being made. And this way it was just thought of as a way of clarifying the process.
Okay. What I mentioned, though, is that seems like it could sort of be the current process. Like, can staff, are they able to chime in if I ask for a report like I did actually on Highway 7? Could staff at that time say, instead of having to do it, so we're not scared to ask questions and question and answer, could staff chime in at their discretion and say, actually that requires a significant body of work and we'd like council's direction to do it? Does staff have that discretion?
Through Mayor Zaire, I believe staff could respond back or could provide a response saying, I would assume it would be more along the lines of we would need to investigate the amount of work it would entail to report back, and then possibly provide an email out to council or identifying the amount of time it may take. I'm not sure if they would know just at the council meeting itself how much might be involved in a particular question, and part of this process would enable time for staff to, prior to the council meeting, to investigate and to identify if additional time or resources are needed to respond to a question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No further, we'll move to proposal 5, and this, 4C. And this is quite simple in terms of changing the consent that is needed by council, going beyond 11 p.m. instead of 12 a.m. There are no comments. We'll now go to clause 5, proposal 5, which limits the presentations to 10 minutes. To go beyond that would require a vote, or the mayor or the committee chair shall keep an account of this and give the notice of 1 minute, and council or committee may extend the time. And this does not apply to special presentations such as budget. Councillor Fernandez.
Just a quick clarification. This is only presentations. So, for example, a consultant or who's doing like a stormwater management presentation would only be allowed 10 minutes?
That's what this is saying, but there may be some times when it can be allowed longer, and that would be dealt with by council.
Okay, that's fine.
That's my interpretation of it. Any different? That was my interpretation. Council simply, on any of them, can extend the time.
Through your Mayor, that is correct. It's also, it should be noted that the presentation would also be, there'd be a staff report or master plan or additional supporting documentation, and that the presentation would mostly just focus on the high-level aspects of the project that's being presented, and that I know there's been times where we may have presentations that'll go for a half hour or longer, and it seems that there's a lot of details being given in the presentation, where this is more a way of ensuring that the presentations are more focused as to exactly what's being requested, as well as focusing in on the major objectives of the project, as opposed to getting every detail of the project, which would be included with the supporting material.
Are we still on this item? I got 2 people. Councillor Yansky.
Yeah, so based on what Colin just said, so I guess the presentations would be limited to 15 slides. Is that the objective? Because sometimes some of the slides that provide each picture is worth 1,000 words sometimes, and it's really good when you go through it to see what's happening. So it all depends on how much time you spend on a slide that could prolong a presentation, but sometimes the points are very meaningful. So I have a question at 15, but
Through you, Mayor Zaire, 15 was set out as mostly a guideline to encourage sort of a target to give to staff or the consultants or whoever may be giving the presentation, something to aim for when they're giving their presentation. I know that we've had presentations in the past where it was 30 slides, but they were pictures and they were set up on sort of a rotating flash basis, and that gentleman was able to get through them fairly quickly. And so it's more of just sort of a guideline. It was put forward as a suggested number. If they're able to get through 20, 30 slides in 10 minutes, then that'd be acceptable. It was more of a goal for people to aim to.
so in the past, when you've been asked, a delegation wants to make a presentation of something, do you go through their slides and know what their nature of their presentation is and view it ahead of time yourself, or you just go and ask them, I got 15 slides or 30 or whatever?
Through you, Mayor Zaire, staff does review every presentation, mostly to ensure compliance with MFIPA.
Compliance
with the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection Privacy Act.
Okay.
So we require presentations to be provided to us by noon on the prior business day, so typically Fridays by noon. And so that allows us time to review the presentations to ensure they comply with MFIPA. We also then, if it's a staff person, we might make a suggestion here or there as to whether or not they require the number of slides. Also, it gives us time to load them onto the computer here to ensure that they will run on our system and to load them into the computer in the back as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Urbanovich?
Thanks. Well, just on this particular issue, Mr. Mayor, I guess what generally speaking, I think 10 minutes works from a presentation point of view, but my concern is around large bodies of work that have been, months in process by staff and potentially consultants, and quite frankly, it could take longer than 10 minutes to make that presentation. The difficulty is that staff may need that time. Under this proposal, they wouldn't know if they had that extra time until they actually got here. And I think that defeats, that doesn't function very well. So I guess my question becomes, would the intent be that in these kinds of more complex issues, we're going to see those issues come to our strat plan sessions first, and therefore, by the time the final report comes here and a decision's being looked at from council, yes, maybe 10-minute presentation's enough. But otherwise, if we're looking at a 2-year body of work and saying, hey, you've only got 10 minutes to present it, I don't think that's being reasonable. So I'd like to understand what the intent is here.
Colin?
Through you, Mayor Zaire. An additional clause could be added under this one that could say that possibly during the agenda setting process for projects that are identified as, say, a major project like the CIS upgrades, or, say when we're dealing with the SAP program, those things where there are major expenditures like that, we could write in an additional clause in here that, consideration be given during the agenda setting process for reports or presentations that may require additional length beyond the 10 minutes, and then it could be agreed to by the mayor and the committee chairs at that time and identified as such to the staff person in advance.
Okay, we can add an extra clause on that one. Okay, there are no further comments on that. We'll move now to 6A, and this is that delegations appearing would be required to register no later than noon on the Wednesday prior to the meeting so that they can appear on the agenda. And should they not be able to do so, that there would still be a chance to contact the clerk's office before 4:30 p.m. on the business day, or Friday, as the normal time would be, and they would be eligible to speak on the agenda. And a revised delegation list could be placed on the council's table at that time. This does not apply to legislative public hearings, and if a person showed up at a meeting without having registered either by Wednesday or by Friday, that the written submission, the staff would work with the individual to get a written submission so that it was available to the council, committee or council. Comments? Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question would be that I'll start out with a statement that one thing that I was surprised to see after being elected into office is the lack of public participation with all that we do here. So maybe I've missed something. Are we really that overburdened with delegations that something like this is really necessary?
Through your mayors there, it's more the impact that unregistered delegations have on the overall meeting time. It's been observed that at certain council meetings, we may have a number of unregistered delegations on an item that's early on in the agenda. And the additional time that's then spent on that item, I can think of, there was a council meeting in September. We had several delegations registered to speak to some traffic calming issues. But we dealt with a number of unregistered delegations with respect to the city operations location in Victoria Park. Due to the amount of time that was taken with the discussion on the Victoria Park issue, unfortunately some of those delegations who had registered to speak to the traffic calming ended up leaving the meeting due to the late hour. So this is more of ensuring that for those who have registered for a meeting that we can give a reasonable expectation that they will be heard within a time frame. And it should be noted that with the additional time that's proposed for the standing committee meetings, we will be giving twice the amount of time available for people to review materials, prepare for a meeting, and register as a delegation. So staff's not trying to imply that we wouldn't have delegations. It's just that ideally we'd like to know in advance. That also ensures that we can contact and make sure that the appropriate staff is also in attendance to respond to questions, which would reduce the likelihood of a matter being deferred or being referred back to staff for greater information, because staff would then be able to come to the meeting and respond to any questions and council be able to deal with that.
Thank you for that clarity. And a lot of times, as much as we would like, people don't generally, they're not so prone to being quite observant as to the agendas that we set out online. That's they seek out information as a first source through there. In many cases, it's people wait until something becomes a hot topic and the media picks up on it. They see it, they get rolled up on, but they're enthused to speak on it, and that's when they are wanting to speak and appear before council. Wouldn't we be sending a wrong message to those individuals?
The mayors there. As part of the proposal, staff were also suggesting that we would have a mechanism so people could submit written comments, so that while they may not be afforded the opportunity to speak at the council meeting, given that they're unregistered delegations, we would then still provide them with an opportunity to submit comments on a proposal, or in those instances where a number of delegations may attend that were unexpected, council would also have the discretion to potentially refer or defer consideration to a later date to allow those people to register for it.
It's any different than if you already do, because I've noticed in the past that we do receive a written submission by individuals who may not be able to appear before council but still send something to council members that gets circulated around. Or are you saying that change would then allow that submission to be read out as part of the process?
No, I don't think that's what he's saying.
So, and I know, and I'm just saying is I see nothing different than what we already do in that account. Go to my comments. Again, I think we had to almost encourage the public to get involved and participate with the process of what we do here with civil governance, especially at the municipal level. I found that we haven't had that much of an issue with delegations, and although I'm sure people would follow the requirement, it may be a little bit of a hassle for some. We are allowing some concessions. It just sends the wrong message. That's all it does. And that's not something that we want to do part of this process.
Okay, Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I would just say that I'd agree with Councillor Singh. At times when we desperately need people involved in local democracy and encourage them to get out and vote, I think we should bend over backwards to avoid any restrictions of delegates. It's been my experience that people often find out late about issues, and I think we should do whatever we can to give them the freedom to register right up to the last moment.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues, and I would say that out of respect for those that are pre-registered, we should hear from those first, and that those people that do wish to speak on an impromptu basis should be heard afterwards. So I do think that's a fair point about the respect for those that have pre-registered. We don't want to lose those people that have taken the time and effort to make their feelings known as an official delegation. I feel badly that we have lost those people sometimes, so I do think we should hear from them first, but I don't want to lose any opportunity to give people a chance to speak spontaneously.
That's what we do now, item by item. Are you suggesting that we only hear from the delegations on all of the items first, and then those who walk in that might have been on an item that was dealt with earlier, that we listen to them? Because obviously that presents a problem.
I guess I'm speaking to those items that may not be on an agenda that people wish to speak to.
Well, we're coming to that yet,
Okay.
that aren't on an agenda. That's Mr. Wilmer, you wanted to add something?
I think to the same point, Mr. Mayor, that you were making, that as I understand the situation Colin's explaining, it's when people show up as unregistered delegations on item number 1, and it takes considerably longer to hear from them, ask them questions, and so on. People who were here for item number 2 or any later item sometimes leave after waiting for hours. So that's the issue we're trying to manage here.
Councillor Davey.
And thank you. That's my point exactly. On one hand, we're saying don't hear from them, so people that have pre-registered. Yeah, sorry, I'm not commenting. Colin, as a compromise, the problem that I've seen, especially items like public input for budget, the problem isn't so much the 5 minutes, it's the 40 minutes that councillors ask questions of the delegation after the fact. So as a compromise, could we do something along the lines of, if they register ahead of time, council can ask questions. If they register at the last minute, yes, we will hear from them, but council is not permitted to ask questions of the delegation.
Through your mayors there, I would leave that up to council's discretion as to how they would like to implement that.
Sure. In your analysis, though, how do you think that would affect timing? Is that the issue, the key, or is the 5 minutes delegation still anticipated to be that much of an issue?
Through mayors there, I'd say that not permitting questions to those unregistered delegations would cut down on the amount of time that they would take. I'd like to draw your attention, though, to the chart that was included with the report, figure 3. It shows 16 municipalities, and it indicates that the majority of which do not allow walk-in delegations for their council meetings.
Yeah.
And 3 actually don't permit delegations at their council meeting, period, which I find incredible.
Thank you. Gauging the sense of council to say no to this outright, I guess I would put forward that as an alternate recommendation, that we definitely don't want to discourage people from engaging council, but if they do register at the last minute. One last question. At the end of this item, it says that staff would work to put together written comments. Now at council, by the time we receive those comments, if they show up at council, presumably we would have already dealt with the issue.
Colin?
Through mayors there, what was sort of envisioned would be that currently at a council meeting, when people are coming in to register as a delegation prior to the meeting, we could facilitate a process whereby the page, as opposed to having them fill out the form to register as a delegation, we could have pre-made comment cards or comment submissions, which could then be quickly photocopied and circulated around the horseshoe to members of council.
Okay. I would put forward an alternative that if anyone registers at the last minute, we hear from them, but council not be permitted to ask questions.
Okay, Councillor Davey, you could bring forward an amendment to that when we get to that. It would, if you choose to do so, it would, I'm presuming, it would be relating to only those who are walk-ins. Councillor Ioannidis.
I don't disagree with many of the comments that were made. I guess one of the questions or concerns that I have is, and we've seen this often, is especially in particular with planning initiatives, where we come out of our dinner or caucus and there's 10 pages of information that we've never had a chance to even look at. Like I think we need to have a process here. I don't know what that is, and Colin, if you could if there's something there that you could suggest, that we be able to look at these documents prior to receiving them, because we never get a chance. And I think that's part of the thing that this is lacking.
Through your Mayor's there, I agree with the difficulty. A lot of times we're only handed those documents as just prior to the meeting.
That's my point. That's why I think there has to be a system so that we can actually look at those and some of those things. I don't know what it is. That's why I asked to your expertise.
I know that there is a provision inside the existing procedural bylaw that does request that people submit any presentation material, ideally by the Wednesday prior to a meeting, but I know that can also be difficult for delegations. And in the case of people who are unregistered, if they're only finding out about the meeting and coming to that, if they haven't been able to register by the Friday prior, it's unlikely that they'd be able to provide any sort of written materials or submit any comments in advance.
Just my concern is that I think those comments are just a loss, that we're not even really looking at them, and it's just kind of bogging down the system and your time, and I think we just need to have a more efficient in that process.
Okay, and when you're speaking, rather than keeping your microphone there, just pull it back if you don't mind, please. Councillor Galway-Seelock.
Yeah, just quickly, I was looking at this one and I think drawing like that line in the sand kind of thing and saying you can't, I think it's really important to have guidelines, and I think these are good guidelines to have, in that we strongly encourage delegations to register in advance, but I like the idea that Councillor Davies brought forward with not asking questions, so there's some incentive there to encourage people to register beforehand.
Okay, moving on to 6B, and this is, sorry, I meant to take a peek at it myself again. The members who have addressed council or committee on a particular issue that will not be permitted to address the council or standing committee on the same matter unless there's substantially new information, and that would be determined by the chair. Should a member of council feel that the submitted materials does not represent new information, then this may be raised through a point of order prior to hearing from the delegation. Comments, Councillor Banovich.
Well, thanks. You said something there that...
It is not there. I misled you again. That was about the chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I misled you.
Okay.
Scratch that.
So then I will ask my question of staff. So the intention here would be that staff would make the determination as to whether or not the new information is substantially new or not?
Colin?
Through your Mayor's there, this similar provision actually currently exists within our procedural bylaws, except it just has the words that persons be encouraged to submit their new information. The way that the process was envisioned would be that we would use this as a requirement so that people who want to speak, so if they've spoken at a standing committee meeting and then wish to attend the subsequent council meeting to speak to the same issue, identifying that they have new information, what we could then use this clause for is requiring them to provide us that new information in writing, which then would form part of the council package. And then any member of council, if they felt that the information wasn't new or was similar to what was circulated at the standing committee meeting, could raise a point of order and identify that in their opinion it wasn't new information, and then the chair or mayor would make a ruling on the point of order.
Okay, well, I guess thanks for that information. I'm struggling with both 6A and going to entertain possibly Councillor Davies' amendment. But 6B, I think, at the same time, I'm struggling with as well. At the end of the day, what matters here is increasing the level of citizen engagement and opportunity for the citizens of our community to participate in our processes. I don't generally see an overabundance of delegations showing up at our meetings. And, you know, I think if we saw that, and we saw that we were having huge problems in terms of getting through our tasks, then that would be a different set of circumstances. But at this point, I'm not seeing that, and so I wouldn't be able to support this. I think the delegation, as we do now, we tell them, unless you have additional information, it's not necessary to come back to council. I think that can be sufficient. We can, word it appropriately. But beyond that, I don't think we should be discouraging people from coming forward.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I just wanted to, a little bit concerned that it can be quite subjective, and some of it may depend on some bias by who the delegation is. We don't want to make sure, if a member of council isn't interested in hearing what the delegation says because they have a bias to them, that could definitely skew whether they want to listen and could change the presentation from council's acceptance of that. So I think it's important that we are not seeing a tremendous amount of delegations. We've heard that around the table all afternoon. I really don't want to be regressive on that.
Councillor Galloway-Sealot.
Yeah, just quickly, I like, if I understood Colin correctly, I like the way that it says now that it encourages people to not bring, that they need to bring new information if it is on the same topics. So I'd be in favor of keeping it in there as it is currently in our procedural bylaw.
Okay. Councillor Etherington, I remind everyone that we have 13 more to go. We've dealt with 9.
Just very quickly, Mr. Mayor, again, same argument. I don't think we should be restricting delegates in any way, shape or form. I think one way to make more time for delegates is for councillors to restrict the verbal overflow that we see happening here at most meetings. So again, it's a question of self-discipline. Thanks.
I would simply add that the same presentation sometimes is given and the same questions are asked of the delegation in a council meeting that have been asked at a committee meeting, and I think that that is redundant. Moving on to 7A. This is the 5-minute timeline for a councillor to ask questions, 2 questions, and then once each member of council has had a chance to ask a question or questions, it goes for a second round, and 5 minutes for that second round. Councillor Fernandez.
Okay. 5 minutes for initial 2 questions. The problem I see is one question often creates another question, and for somebody to say, I've asked one question, it starts another question, and then it starts another question. For me to stop talking and stop asking questions until everybody else has asked questions, and maybe my questions are germane to what somebody else is asking. So I understand that sometimes some of us are holding the floor longer than others, but if we're the first ones to queue in and we have the list of questions, we should just carry on and ask the questions. And if we're covering areas, and we've heard that many times, somebody says, oh, that was my question, okay, then we've cleared that up. And I think that's more time-saving than to go all the way around and then come back. Councillor Yanetsky.
I disagree with this proposal. I've noticed many times, and a number of councillors, including myself, that on some topics you don't say anything, but yet other topics all of a sudden you've got a half a dozen questions that you feel are important. So I think it should be unlimited, and although you use your own discretion in terms of being as efficient as possible. And I do agree that a lot of times that questions are asked by others that, okay, that takes care of my question because I have the same question. So you just don't ask it. So I would disagree having this and going through 2 rounds or 3 rounds. Just whoever's first gets to go first.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you. I was going to suggest 3 questions, and then I thought there's some people that are subject matter experts around certain topics of the environment or different issues, so I think that we shouldn't restrict the number of questions. One thing I think it's important, and we haven't covered in here, is that we would ask the chair to restrict people that make preambles that are extensive and to the question. I think that's a huge time waster. And that's not been covered here. So I think that As Councillor Etherington says, that does allow for some discretion from the chair. It's not covered here. I don't think it needs a formal amendment, but I would not be in support of this.
Colin, help me out. I think there were, is there one other place about preambles?
Through the mayor, it was looked at as, with having it as 2 questions, it would that would then require members to focus in on the question and to, with the 5-minute allotment, it would reduce the likelihood of a preamble, given they would only have 5 minutes to ask and receive a response, so the likelihood of a preamble being asked would be reduced.
All right, thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly support this recommendation. It shouldn't be a race to the mic. We were all elected here, and the public deserves to hear all our opinions. And so if a councillor has more opinions, they have their time afterwards once everyone else is here to suggest their comments. So I wholeheartedly support this.
Councillor Davey.
Yes, actually, that was my point, that we're not limiting questions here. All we're saying is that you can only ask 2, and then if you still have more questions, and presumably if there's time allotted, the chair would come back to you. And I have to agree with Councillor Ioannidis. I don't like the Jeopardy-style approach to who gets to ask the questions.
Councillor Benovich.
Thanks. For me, what I like about this is it's consistent with an approach that actually exists both provincially and federally in our legislatures, where they do receive delegations, and then the members of the committee actually rotate so that there's some fairness there around everyone having an opportunity to ask the questions that they want. There isn't a specific number of questions allocated. It's based on a time frame, and that time frame is 5 minutes. So maybe that's the compromise in this situation that we should be looking at, that there's a maximum of 5 minutes. If a councillor doesn't have any questions, then they pass and it goes on to the next person. And we work through it that way up until the allotted time for the item as is being suggested earlier in the agenda. But I think it is only fair, as Councillor Ioannidis has said, that we provide an opportunity for all members of council to be heard and not anyone in particular to dominate a particular issue.
Can you clarify? It goes on a rotation basis. So, for argument's sake here, on the item A, Councillor Gazzola gets to kick it off. Item B, Councillor Glenn Graham, and so on. Or what are you saying that it rotates?
So in the case of a provincial or a federal legislature, because you have a party system in place, there's certain allocations in terms of how those spots are assigned. So sometimes it goes from party 1 to party 2 to party 3, and the parties themselves decide who goes first, second, third.
But we don't have that.
No, I understand that. So in our case, it would be you would pipe in terms of request to speak, and you'd be given 5 minutes, and then the second person who requests to speak would be given 5 minutes.
Got it.
But whether that allows 1 question or that allows 4 questions, you get 5 minutes max.
Okay. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. I think this is an appropriate change to the procedure. And many times I found myself, just out of respect, not asking the same thing twice. But whereas one topic is monopolized by one particular person who tends to ask a lot of questions, and then I may not have asked that question the same way myself, but then unfortunately, I'm reluctant to asking the same thing again. So I think this allows the fairness that's been lacking around the procedure of allotting appropriate time for each council member, and I think this is a good step forward. The only thing is about the 2 questions. I think if someone can be quick and conform to the 5-minute, limit, if they have 1 odd question more, I think it would be appropriate. I don't think there's a lot of questions you can ask within 5 minutes anyways, so that 2 question may add some, some issues by some members down the road. That's the only thing I may want to comment on. We may want to consider that.
Councillor Galloway-Sealog.
Actually, that's what I was thinking when I read this initially, was that maybe it's just giving a total of 5 minutes for their initial round of questions. And then I think it's really important that we, as councillors, prioritize our questions. So you get your first round of questions out first, and then you hear from other question or other members of council or committee, and have them ask questions. And then, if need be, you can come back to it. So I think it puts some of the onus on us to ask our questions in priority. But I think we should go to a 5-minute max instead of 2 questions to allow time for some quick follow-ups.
Okay, there are no further. 7B states that that members of council obviously are allowed to ask questions, but not, first of all, enter into debate with members of council or with the delegations, and the questions should be limited in scope to things that the delegation has stated. In other words, not leading the delegation. And clearly, if there are technical issues beyond that delegation's ability to answer, that should be identified in a further report. Sorry, that's not quite what that says. Unless the delegation has been identified as a technical expert on the matter being considered. I'm trying to paraphrase, and sometimes I don't get it right. Councillor Fernandez.
I don't think we do this now. I mean, I very rarely have seen any of us enter into a debate with a delegation. I think most of the time the chair has stopped us pretty quickly in our tracks. On the respect to the technical experts, that can be pretty subjective sometimes, because we don't understand a neighborhood, and I've heard this a number of times from other meetings that I've attended, and where the person is the expert in their neighborhood. They understand their community, they understand their street, they understand the situation they're living in. If we're talking about a traffic calming situation or a change in planning or zoning, they're the people that live there. So they may not be a planning expert or engineering expert, but they're an expert in their neighborhood, and I think we should be giving them their due time and justice to what they have to say. The quotation or quotation marks around expert certainly shouldn't apply to an expectation of some of our delegates who really have passion and feel very strongly about the community they live in. So I'm not very supportive of the whole technical expert. I think that really can be taken in a number of different ways, and I don't think we do the debate now anyway. So I really think this point is quite redundant.
Councillor Banovich.
Thanks. I'm fine with the first sentence in 7B, but I think the rest of it, I would agree with Councillor Fernandez. It's very difficult to determine, like, I don't think it's my place to decide if somebody is a technical expert or not when I'm asking them questions. I presume that if they're here, they either have interest in a topic or they have some expertise they're bringing to the subject. And I don't know that we should necessarily be second-guessing that. But I think the point around not getting into a debate is generally the practice, and I think it's good to reaffirm that.
There are no further comments. 7C. And this would be where the chair may curtail the delegation if there are derogatory comments made about staff or individuals, and that the chair rules that delegation is concluded should that happen. In fact, I have had to do that so few times, but it would be good to have it, just out of courtesy, it would be good to have that in the regulations. Comments on 7C? None. 7B. This is where there are erroneous or unsubstantiated comments that are made by a delegation. A member of council could have a point of order to clarify. Councillor Fernandez.
This speaks directly to what Mr. Druitz was talking about. It happens quite often where a delegate gets misquoted or misunderstood by what they're saying, and I realize we're trying to reduce our meeting times, but nevertheless, I think it's important that if there is, I'm the one who has seen consultants come walking down either before I sat here on council and after I've sat here on council to reconfirm or correct or rebuttal a particular or bring new information. I think we deserve to give the public that same respect And I think that really what we should be adding here is if a delegate has an opportunity where they are referred to by a city councillor in their comments, that they should be allowed a 2-minute opportunity to come forward and correct what could be misunderstood or give a rebuttal. 2 minutes is no time at all. I'm not saying you enter into discussion. The delegate is allowed to come down, give a 2-minute rebuttal, and then they remove themselves.
Councillor Davey.
Just a question on this, and sort of along the lines of what Councillor Fernandez is saying. So would staff, or I guess the city official, also staff or council, is the intention of this to call the point of order in the middle of the delegation's comments so that they could respond?
Colin?
Through your Mayor, sir. It was to provide the capability to staff or a member of council. So just a hypothetical situation, if a delegation stands up there and says the city's spending X amount of dollars on doing a particular project, or provide some information that's just false, then a member of council could raise a point of order at the time and interject to say, point of order through the mayor, the exact number is, or city officials, so Mr. Chapman, Mr. Wilmer, or Mr. May, or one of the other deputy CEOs could interject to say, our accounts read that it has X amount of dollars left in it, or whatever the issue might be. So it would allow them, it would be up to sort of the discretion of the chair if they want to rule on it immediately at that point, or if they will accept the point of order once the delegation's finished talking. But depending on what information is conveyed by the delegation, it might better serve council's interest to have it dealt with as soon as possible. To clarify, just in case the delegation statements, they might not know the statement that they're making is incorrect. They might have read something somewhere and believe that to be the actual true number. So it could be a matter of providing that correction to the delegation, and then the delegation possibly having a change of mind with respect to an issue.
Okay, and if it takes up time, obviously we have the chair's discretion to add a bit of time to the delegation time. Okay, and sorry, and to clarify then, can staff call that point of order? If Mr. Chapman notices a number is incorrect, would he be able to call a point of order at that time?
Through Mayor, sir, this proposal would provide that capability to staff to call that point of order.
Okay, so then just a very quick comment then. I think that actually answers Councillor Fernandez's wish for the 2-minute rebuttal as far as, especially as far as staff goes. If there's an issue, you should raise it at the time the delegate's up there, and then we don't have to worry about this coming back to the podium stuff.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Just on the same issue, is this the same thing that was addressed by the delegation, Harold Jewitz, on having the delegation itself want to have an additional comment to provide a clarification? That's yes, because you were talking about staff and we're counseling. So if that allows the delegation, that'll be the discretion of the chair then. Is that where we're heading towards that?
Well, that's not what this says, but there are some varying opinions on it.
Yeah, okay.
The only comment that I would say on this is that there's a fundamental issue here that we're starting to slide into, I think, and that is that it is council who is, a representative democracy is for council and the elected people to make a decision, and after public input, of course. And once that has occurred, it is then council's decision and debate that needs to occur. I believe it is not appropriate to end up in a debate with the delegation at the, because we've just sort of dealt with that matter on 7B. So there is the risk that's what would happen. There could be a difference of opinion as to what is the fact or what is not the fact. And because there obviously are sometimes. So I think that it's very difficult to enter into, you run that slippery slope of getting into an argument with the delegation, and then the reasonable amount of time for the delegation starts to slip away and you've run into some difficulty. Councillor Fernandez.
Just a point of clarification. I really am just talking about, should I, for example, refer to the delegate and the statement that they made, and I say the delegate said, or about a particular part of their presentation, and what I'm saying is incorrect, that the delegate have the opportunity to come down and say, no, this is what I said in my presentation, to make sure that it's just very clear. I'm not asking for a rebuttal. I'm not asking for a debate. I'm not asking for me to make a comment and say, you know, you're wrong, you're right. Just for them to have the opportunity to come down and give a point of clarification and make sure that what they said is understood by everybody.
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying. I just say it's a slippery slope because that will lead to a further augmentation of what was actually said. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that one out and see how that has happened before. Okay, there are no further items or no speakers on that. 8A. Yes, 8A. That once everyone has been afforded an opportunity to ask questions, no further discussion or debate should occur on the matter until a formal written motion has been brought forward for consideration. And in most cases, that, of course, is the recommendation that has come from staff. Any concerns with that? Councillor Fernandez.
I just want to make sure that I understand exactly what I'm reading, and that my understanding is that the clerks are always taking notes and are trying as best as they can to capture the motion, especially when there's a variety of amendments to the motion. So the written motion that is being brought forward or that's going to be discussed is the one that the clerk is trying to capture from what everybody is saying. How is that any different than what we're doing now?
Well, in this case, one of the previous ones, which I would hope would be adopted, was that any motion has to be in writing. So we're not relying on the clerk to interpret what has been said.
Okay, so if I've written a motion here about a particular subject, while the discussion is going forward, how is that going to be, is going to be an accepted motion then? Because I've sat here and written it during the discussion?
Yes, provided it's within the context of what's being talked about and not something coming in that would ordinarily require a notice of motion.
Right.
We're talking about
Right.
something
No, I'm
that's germane.
Only germane to what we're talking about.
And normally it would be an amendment to the motion.
Okay.
Oftentimes, that's what would end up being happening.
All right.
Or not even. Well,
I just
yes,
want to make sure that I
amendment,
understand.
But in addition to another clause, that sort of thing.
Yep. Okay.
8. There's one more. Councillor Rabinovich.
Well, just on that, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed at some other councils that they're able to do when those kinds of changes are made is there's a mechanism for the staff to be able to put the motion up on the screens from their working computer. So maybe that's, I don't know if we have that capability to do so now very easily, but maybe that's something we should be trying to be in a position to do so that staff can do that, and then we have that clarity in front of all of us when we actually vote on the motion.
Are you referring to when there is a word change made in a motion?
A word change or a new clause added or something along those lines.
That is often done at conferences where you've got hundreds or thousands of people.
It's done at municipal councils as well. I mean, I've seen it in Toronto and so on.
Do we have that capacity?
Through your Mayor, it is something, I mean, we could always put up the handwritten clause, if it's an additional clause, on the overhead. It's also been contemplated, and I still need to follow further with IT about possibly putting on like an Outlook account onto that computer there. And therefore, if a member council has an additional clause that they would like, they could always email it quickly to the clerk staff sitting there, and we could then put it on the overhead through the presentation computer. So we have contemplated several different ways, but probably the easiest low-tech way would be just to drop it out of the overhead.
And I think that would work for a new clause. Councillor Rabinovich, I think, is talking about when there is a word change or a two-word change. It often, at least I've tried to reiterate that just before we make the motion. But as we know in conferences, big screen, there's the recommended motion that's already there, and someone is working behind the scenes to stroke it out, put the new word in so that everyone knows what is being voted on. That's something to investigate, I think. Number 8B, that no member without leave of council will speak to the same motion or in reply for longer than 5 minutes. That also, it's related to the question answer, but this is ultimately during the debate session. Any comments? Seeing none. Councillor Fernandez?
I'd like to say I could say what I need to say in 5 minutes, but I know I can't. And I know it's often my points have follow one in the other. I think 5 minutes is utopian, but I don't think we're going to be able to do that. I really don't. And I think it might be very difficult for some of us to curtail our comments within 5 minutes. I think there should be some latitude or ability for some latitude that we could say between 5 and 10 minutes, because if it's a particular issue, and Strasbourg Road is a perfect example, something I've been involved in, I was very passionate, and I'm already going over even 1 minute right now as I'm talking. I think we need to change that. 5 minutes is too short.
Okay, there are no other comments. 9A, this is where an item is not on the agenda and is intended to come forward at a later date. This is where a person is requesting to be a delegate. Staff would refer the person to the appropriate meeting, thereby ensuring that the appropriate staff will be in attendance and supporting materials are circulated for the Council's consideration. 9B, where a person wishes to speak to an issue that is within the jurisdiction of Council, but the item does not appear on a meeting agenda, consideration of that request will be referred to the next available agenda-setting meeting for scheduling by the committee chairs. Councillor Fernandez.
I think that the concern I have with this is that oftentimes something may be happening within the community, and I'll speak to 689 Dune Village Road, where situations are occurring, though it's not on the agenda, and it's under our jurisdiction, and the public is so up in arms that they want to appear before a council meeting. It may be a televised council meeting. They may want to make a very strong point publicly, and I think sometimes we have to have some of that latitude. We can't say to those residents who've taken the time out of their busy schedules to come and address something they're very passionate about that's happening in their neighborhood. So I really think that we're curtailing, again, the public's ability to make comments on situations that are happening within their community and within their neighborhood. We have to make sure that they have that opportunity, even if it is not on the agenda that night.
You recall from one of the earlier ones, though, that they still can get onto the agenda the Friday before, and it appears that there would be some mechanism that's coming forward as an amendment to the same clause that would say we would hear people without questions who walk in. So it may or may not. And there's always a circumstance, or there could be a circumstance, where something is a time-sensitive or an emergency, which obviously supersedes everything.
Well, nevertheless, I'm not supporting this one. So.
That's fine. Councillor Branovich.
Well, thank you. Just, I guess, 9B and 9C, I mean, they all seem to sort of flow together. And again, they put staff in an awkward position where they're making decisions that rightfully are council's decisions about, what may or may not be within the jurisdiction of council and so on. And it's a habit that, quite frankly, I've seen sometimes at other local governments, and one that I don't think is necessarily helpful to the democratic process. So I think we need to be cautious about moving ahead with some of these that may be curtailing the opportunity for individual delegations to appear before council.
Remember, this is not that they appear before council. They appear before council. I'm speaking now of 9A. It's a matter of timing. And Okay, sorry. The only other comment I wanted to make on were all of these items, I think there was a wording change when it's referred to the agenda setting meeting. It's scheduled by the committee chairs and mayor, or the agenda setting meeting. It's just not consistent wording throughout, so we can, it's just a minor edit. 9C, you're correct, is similar. Any comments on 9C? This is where it's not on a meeting agenda, and it's questionable whether it falls into the city's jurisdiction. 9D, that when it is deemed appropriate through the agenda-setting process that a delegation address council and/or committee, the clerk shall so notify the delegation and council with a supporting explanation. Did I say that inappropriate? I meant that. I'm not sure if I said appropriate or inappropriate. Okay, 10A, that in keeping with the requirements already provided for a municipal code, all motions except questions of privilege or purely procedural motions shall be made in writing and must be seconded before they are voted on. You'd think that's normal, but not always followed. Councillor Fernandez.
Just need to understand what questions of privilege actually means.
Fernandez?
Sorry, I just wanted to understand what questions of privilege actually meant. Somebody maybe needs to just remind me.
Through your mayors there, those are points of orders, motions for adjournment. The motion that the question be now put are all considered motions that are considered privileged. So it's sort of the standard kind of, you defer as kind of almost a Robert's rules, kind of those types of motions that come forward.
All right, thanks for that, Colin.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. On this, it might be actually easier and more efficient if we only implement this for council meetings. I think at committee meetings at times, and I'm looking to staff to comment, but committee meetings at times it might actually slow the process down if we're making amendments to have everything written out.
And we don't second the motions.
And we don't second, right.
Council or at committee.
Right. So is this intended for, like, I'm happy with this if we would add the words at council as opposed to just committee as well. Any comments on that?
Through the mayor, there is a clause that currently in the existing procedural bylaw that says that seconders aren't required at committee meetings, so that would take care of not needing the seconder with respect to this clause. The intent is similar to the one that was considered as part of 8A, which is essentially reinforcing what's currently in the existing procedural bylaws, that all motions be written out. And it was viewed that this would ensure clarity as to what is being discussed and considered, and would provide greater transparency as to what the council is ratifying at either standing committee or council meeting.
Okay, so there's no concern here that we're going to be waiting for it to be written out properly. You don't think that's going to slow things down even at committee?
Through the mayor, with respect to amendments, it's contemplated that only those amendments that are substantive in nature or would add additional clause would need to be written out. If it was a minor sort of word change or crossing out a word or adding something in, those wouldn't necessarily need to be rewritten out. It could be just a general consensus of council that yes, that you would strike out a particular word in the motion. This is more about ensuring that everyone's on the same page with regards to recommendations that are coming forward. And the easiest way of doing that is having it written out. I know that a number of times, immediately following a council meeting, I might turn to a member of council and know that they would have written out their motion that they would have brought forward. And so I know it's current practice for several councillors to already write out a motion that they're proposing. And so either having that facilitated by sending it to the clerk computer there or putting it on the overhead, it would reduce the amount of sort of questions of clarification as to what's being considered.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, I had somewhat of a similar concern as Councillor Davey in the last bit. I think it's a suggestion that would be more helpful for council meetings and committee meetings, especially where a notice of motion isn't required. A lot of times amendments and changes are quite fluid and ongoing, and I think this would add an extra component which would rather add delays to the process rather than adding some efficiencies. One suggestion made earlier by, I think, Mayor Zaire was perhaps having, where the clerk is able to quickly amend the motion or add additional lines to the motion where they can type it out as it's quickly spoken out. Simply, it's just, I agree when items are well in advance, the council member knows that they want to make necessary changes. It's helpful that a recommendation be made that they bring forward in written form to ease the process. But when things are quite fluid in transition, it's very hard to do that. And I think this would only belabour the process rather than speed the process any further. So I would I'll move at an appropriate time to only be for council meetings.
And I would assume that when we're talking about a written motion coming forward sort of on the fly, that these would not be motions that need whereases, because that would be, I think, totally out of order, because that gets into a whole array of other things. Councillor Glenn Gray.
Thank you very much. I think this speaks to the effective part more than the efficient part of a good council or committee meeting. I do believe that we need to take the time, if there's a substantively different intention or amendment, to write it out. And no, it wouldn't speed it up, it would slow it down, but I do think for clarity's sake and transparency that it does benefit us all, and that's been called for. And I think that it's been very helpful for me to see what's written out, rather than speculating or having additional debate about what is or what isn't on the table.
Okay, now 10B, the last item. This is which would discontinue the practice of friendly amendments in instances where the proposed amendment represents a substantive change or would add a further clause to the main motion. In other words, a change of a word here or there could still be friendly, but that otherwise it would be in the form of an amendment which would be voted on separately. Councillor Davey.
To clarify, this is when you're saying so substantive, it's at the discretion of the chair, or if the chair accepts it, a member of council can argue that it's not substantive. How would it work?
Colin?
Through Mayor Zaire, it could be dealt with in several different ways. I would think that for the most part it would probably just be a general consensus. I mean, if it was a motion that council buy 15 blue school buses and someone puts forward a recommendation that no, they should be yellow, and everyone seems to be accepting of that, then that could be deemed as a friendly amendment. If the color of the school bus for some reason was contentious or viewed as a substantive change, then the chair would request that a motion or vote be taken on that. So it would be, you would need to sort of play it by ear, see just depending on the changes. I would say, though, for something where it would add an additional clause or where it's evident that it is a major change or addition to a motion, that those should be voted on by council or the committee.
Okay, just so again, so I have a full understanding. If we use your example of the school buses, if personally, I like this. I think the way it should work, though, is I don't think there should really be a vote on it. I think any member of council should say, I don't think that's substantive, and then it's voted on separately. Is that, or would it require a vote if one member of council accepts it as friendly, and another member of council says, no, I think it's substantive, or do we have to vote on it?
Through the mayor, this was viewed as a bit of a compromise between what it states strictly in Robert's Rules and what the current practice is. Robert's Rules identifies that there should not be any friendly amendments. It indicates that any motion that's put forward, once it's put forward, belongs to the body that's deliberating it, and therefore that group or assembly needs to make the decision as to any changes that are to that motion. However, it was acknowledged that that could then be a very lengthy process for a lot of these kind of minor changes that help to wordsmith or might help facilitate a motion that, for the most part, all of council agrees with. I would say that if any member of council objected to an amendment being considered friendly, that then the chair would have it in their discretion to call a vote on that motion.
And in fact, I think that's the way we have been handling it. I know that when I've been in the chair, if there is an objection, often even without a request by a councillor, recognizing that it may be divisive, that we take the motion as an amendment.
Thank you.
Councillor Verbanovich.
Thanks. I too just want to understand this better. So I'm going to go to a concrete example of a recent one that I recall we had dealt with, and it was on the hurricane assistance, that donation that we made to the MCC. And originally, I had moved a $5,000 donation. Councillor Gazzola, if I remember correctly, felt it should be higher and made a friendly amendment of $10,000. I accepted that as being friendly. Are you saying in this particular instance that that might be substantive and we would have had to deal with it differently? And if so, how would you have suggested we deal with it then? Or is that still not substantive? If that makes sense.
Through the Mayor, I would say in that instance, given the general consensus around accepting that increase in funding, that wouldn't have represented a substantive change or a change that would be needed to have been voted on, because it was the general will of council that everyone was in agreement with the increase in funding. Given that if it was contentious or if several members might have said no, we're okay with only 5, then I would recommend that they would need to vote on that amendment in recognition of the rights of those minority members of council who may have opposed to that increase.
And so in that instance, we would have taken the $10,000 as a separate amendment, voted on it first, and then it would replace the original $5,000 amount if it carried, and we would deal with the broader motion.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are no further speakers. So now, you said we could come back and add some, councillors could have general comments, but I would ask that you make those general comments without necessarily referring to any of the specifics, because you had your turn at that point, and then we will, after the general comments, we'll go vote through and vote on each one separately. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I guess what I really want to reiterate that we heard around here a number of times today was the fact that it's important to have public input. It's important to hear what the public has to say. And some of the recommendations that we're seeing don't speak to that and don't speak to the transparency. Although I do agree that there are times when we get very wordy and we get very chatty and we ask a lot of questions and sometimes we repeat each other. It's really important for the public to understand what we are saying, how we feel, and to hear our questions. And I'll be quite frank with you, I have never had a member of the public come to me and say, in the 3 years I've sat here, that you ask too many questions and you should stop asking questions. I have had more times people say to me, thank you for asking questions that I was thinking about. Thank you for asking questions, even if it may seem stupid at the time. I've always said to my students, there's no stupid question, just the ones that you don't ask. So I think it's part of the democratic process. It's part of the reason that we have been elected. It's our due diligence, whether it takes us 2 hours to do a meeting or it takes us 4 hours to do a meeting. You know, you can't put it down to cost, because the process, the democratic process, does not have a time constraint, nor should it have a time constraint. I understand we put in very long days on Mondays and Tuesdays, and that's often times where I've thought, why are we not breaking out our committee meetings so that we have 2 on one day and 1 on another? I think that's something we maybe should be looking at and considering in the future. You know, I looked at some of the information, and it was interesting that London still had 4-hour meetings, even though they have more. They have less time for delegations. I think Mr. Druitt's made an interesting point. 10 minutes if you pre-register for a particular issue. I don't think it actually will increase the length of our meetings. I think it'll be more succinct and more clear, and we won't have as many questions if a presenter is or a delegate is making a 10-minute presentation on a very intensive and serious issue. So it's our job to ask the questions. The public needs to see where we stand on issues, and the public needs to be able to come forward and ask questions and to make their opinions known. It's long days, but it's our job. And I would be amiss if I said, let's hurry up and let's get this done. And if we don't put in enough time for that particular issue, if we ask too many questions, That's just the way it is. And I think that that's, I guess if you can't take the heat, then maybe you should get out of the kitchen.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thanks very much. Democracy is a very messy process sometimes, and I think that the chair really has the discretion currently to make sure things are on track, and I don't think a lot of these are required. I do think that the onus is on us, though, to be really focused and sharp and to not spend time with extensive preambles or to ask questions that have been asked. I think that it's really important for us to be respectful, not only of each other's time, but also of those people that do show up here for meetings. So that would be my main comment, that I do think that most of the things that are covered here already are in place with the discretion that is currently there for the chair.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yes, I'd like to start off by complimenting staff. I think they've done an excellent report. I think they've shown a lot of, given us a lot of good information and put up a lot of things that are raising a lot of good questions. And I think I don't agree with a lot of what they've said, but I think they've done a good job. I think what we're doing here, I find I don't agree with a lot of it, because I think we're trying to fix something that really, in my mind, isn't broken. The biggest thing we're talking about here is our time. I think that's the biggest issue here, and it's not. This is to really get into a job like this. There's a lot of time required. I think it's good that with the information that's come out of here, the people that are aspiring to this type of office can get a good idea of exactly what is involved in a position like this, and that's a good thing that's coming out of it. But generally speaking, I think this is going in the wrong direction as far as transparency is concerned. We seem to be limiting things, limiting people. I've been around this horseshoe for over 40 years in different capacities, and one of the greatest things that I've always thought about is that, people can almost walk in off the street and give elected people their 2 cents worth. And I think that's a great thing. Often it's not relevant and what have you, but I think it means so much to people to have an opportunity to come in and have their say and have an opportunity to be listened to. And so many levels of government that are so big, the person on the street has no idea where to turn. They're frustrated. They don't get to have any say. But at least in our system, they do have an opportunity. It's probably quite commonly known that I don't have a great deal of faith in the way our chairs are picked. And I really feel that a lot of this is going on to give additional powers to chairs, and I think if we go in that direction, perhaps we need to look at the method that we use in picking chairs and vice chairs. At this point, I have no problem with each item being voted upon and members of council indicating in which direction they currently favor. But I would really ask members of council to, after that, leave the issue on the table. It's there for everyone to see. It's there for people that are aspiring to office to see, and that it really be dealt with a new council. I think when I've seen other issues where an outgoing council has made some fairly drastic changes, and when a new council comes in, they get burdened with it and have really no idea of how things have arisen. So this has been, I think, leaving this issue for another few months, basically. We're not talking that much time. I don't have a problem. There are one or two issues that there seems to be total agreement with at this point. Fine, deal with those, but the majority of the report, I feel, should be left for a new council.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to thank staff for bringing the report forward. I think this council and committee, previous committees asked for this very thing, and I don't think any blame or can be put on staff for some of the suggestions put forward. I think there are plenty of options before us, but that doesn't mean that all the options are appropriate to this council and appropriate to our community. The fundamental responsibility I see as a councillor and as for the City Hall is to ensure that there is an open, transparency, public input process to the decisions that we make. The foremost importance for me where I put in it is that my responsibility is to protect the democratic process, and it's not necessarily for how quickly meetings take place. I would love to be able to go home early and spend time with my 1-year-old who's doing a lot of new things every day, but if it means that it's going to be at the jeopardy of limiting democracy, I'm not supportive of that. So there are some options here that do improve the process, they really do, and whereas others that don't necessarily add higher transparency. In fact, they do contrary to that effect, and so for them I won't support. So thank you.
Councillor Yudetsky.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just a little confused as to where we are right now in terms of the discussions that we've had, and yet we're talking about this being deferred to January 13th meeting.
There will be a separate amendment to the motion that Councillor Gazzola is bringing forward, but it will be a separate one, to have this discussion and go on record, this council goes on record, but that the matter be deferred to the 2014-2018 council for final approval and implementation. We'll vote on that separately.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And if that fails, or if it passes, it's obvious what it is. If it fails, we will proceed with we're going to proceed with all of it in any event to get it on record. But then some of the items would be potentially taking effect immediately, as is Proposal 1, which people seem to think immediate, and others would come back to the January 13th meeting and ultimately a week or so later to a bylaw.
Okay. All right, thank you for the clarification. I felt that municipal government was probably the most feasible and transparent and accountable of all three levels of government. It gives the public an excellent opportunity to appear in a council chamber, to watch us in progress, to ask questions and appear as delegations and ask questions, put in that order, as opposed to the federal and provincial process. I mean, you get to see it on TV, but you get a great distance to go to, and even then, you can't appear as delegations. And then you got to go through a process through committees, and that's another story itself. I see this process as we got here in terms of some of the proposals being good, but yet others being detrimental to the public, and I'm not going to support some of them. I always thought that having everybody the opportunity, whether it's councillors or public, to speak and to speak without any limitations is the democratic process. It allows for them to express their views, and whether we have to sit here longer, that's fine. I see one of the proposals is to curtail it by 11 o'clock. Does that mean now we start at 6 and still have the same length? I doubt it. Those are basically my comments. I agree with some, but not with others. But I think the transparency and the opportunity for the public to have their say should not be diluted.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Mayor Zara. I just wanted to clarify. So we're going to be taking the motion I brought forward first, and then as a separate motion, Councillor Gazzola's afterwards. Is that?
He's going to make a motion as a clause as an amendment.
Okay.
And I will take his amendment first.
My comments, I'm happy to see this report. Colin, you're in the hot seat. I thought you did a great job because there's a lot of temperamental questions. Having said that, I don't agree with everything in the report. I think we need to make some changes around delegations. I think we need to accept them as often as possible, and you'll see that. But what this report says to me is it's right now what I'm hearing from some members of council is it's more talk from the same person is better, whether it's a delegate or a member of council. And I think the whole point of the democratic process is that it's not the person that talks the most or the person that talks the loudest that should dominate. It should be distributed as equitably as possible. So when I hear comments along the lines of, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen, I look at that and say, well, this is the kitchen. Who's here at the end of the day? Council's here, staff's here. Who are the people that are actually getting out of the kitchen? Well, it's people that registered as a delegate that didn't want to stick around and went home. It's people that at home are watching on TV and they're staying up late for the single item that they want to see, but they go to bed because we go to 1 o'clock in the morning. What we need to do is we need to refine the process because, as the report outlines, we are clearly an outlier in terms of our meeting efficiency. We need to improve that. So as we go through, yes, I'm going to make some changes, but on balance, this is an excellent report and it's only going to make things better. And one final point, I do not like the idea at all, being a new member of council for this term, of putting this before the next term of council, because for those of us that are returning, that's fine. But for a new member of council to absorb this in addition to every single new facet of the organization they're going to have to absorb, they're going to make the wrong decision, as I probably would have made the wrong decision if this was put before me in my first year.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to add that to Colin, excellent report, Colin, and I apologize if I put you on the spot with a couple of questions. I also feel very strongly that I will never support anything that restricts both delegates and councillors, although on the latter I'm sorely tempted sometimes. When we talk about that Councillor Fernandez kitchen, all I'm asking for is some room in that kitchen, and that's all I would say.
Councillor Urbanovich.
Thanks, Mayor Zare. As I said earlier, I appreciate the work done by staff. I will support some of the recommendations, but not others. Anything that strengthens local democracy and citizen engagement, I think, is a positive. I do think taking time for further citizen input between now and January makes sense, but I concur with Councillor Davey that I won't be able to support something that defers this to the next term of council. I don't think that's fair. I mean, for all we know, there could be 11 new people around this horseshoe next term, and I don't think it's fair for them to be burdened with this amongst their first pieces of work that they're going to have to deal with next term.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, I think overall Colin did a great job, and I think this is a long time coming. I think we need to get our meetings in order, and we need to get our points across succinct as possible. And again, it's part of our responsibility as a council to understand what's in this material that's given to us. And I don't think asking hundreds of questions in public is necessarily doing that. I think you have that latitude to get that information from staff, and then from there you can convey whatever issues that you want. But I think to have everyone else have to sit and listen to those same questions over and over again, even ones that were repeated, it's not doing anyone the service. It's not doing anyone in the community service, especially those who wish to speak on an issue and then have to leave because it's taken hours. So I think overall, with some of the tweaks that's being suggested, I think we'll create some efficiencies, and I look forward to seeing this through. And I agree. I think this needs to be put today. It's to me, this is about dollars and cents, and this is about being efficient and cutting out the red tape. And I don't want to delay this any further into another council. This needs to be done now.
Councillor Fernandez, you're not going to comment, you're going to add something?
Right. It was my question regarding the ability to view the screen, similar to what the chair can view. You had said I needed to ask that outside of the process, so I wanted to make sure that I asked that question.
Well, I would suggest that you would have to make that. I don't know that that's an amendment to the clause today.
No, it isn't. I understand that.
It's a completely separate item.
Okay, so...
Okay, well, I'll save my comments on that. That's outside of this.
Okay, since we're talking about process and procedures, I thought this was the right time, but I can hold that off till later tonight.
Okay. All right. Just like to make a couple of comments. It is clear, undeniably clear, from facts, independent information, factual information, that our meetings are lengthy meetings. And as I think it was Councillor Davies said, we're an outlier in that. And I have people state to me that they have noticed that our meetings are lengthy, and that we end up spinning our wheels many times during the meeting. Can't read my writing for just a minute. I think that part of the reason that they are is that questions are being asked that have already been asked. Redundant questions are being asked that where the information is already in the report and therefore don't need to be asked. And either the homework hasn't been done, or people want airtime. This is Council's opportunity to set a protocol in place that will make our meetings more effective. And it's time to, in other words, deal with this at this point in time. I would not be supporting moving it off to the next council. I think that would be totally irresponsible. And so I would not voting in favor of that. There's reference that this is all about transparency. I think that this councils have increasingly become more transparent. The city has become much more transparent as an evolutionary type of thing. And that's a good thing. I don't know of any other time that there has been more information available to the public. First of all, we're working on the open government and open data process. We are making sure that our council meetings are going on stream, live streamed. We're not quite there. It's now in the experimental stage, and we will very, very shortly be live. All of that adds to the transparency. And so this is very much in keeping with that, and I object to saying comments being made that this is anti-transparency. That is not the way I will be voting. The reason for my votes on this, it is to make the meetings more effective, and we get on with it. So with that, there was a motion to put forward by Councillor Davey, which is what you see, except for the words in the first clause, to instead of say be approved, be approved in principle, and further that it be taken to a special council meeting on January the 13th. And once that, the normal process, although it doesn't say it in here, the normal process would be if it is approved by council at a meeting, it would come back at a subsequent meeting, and I think Colin said February the 3rd, with a bylaw to entrench it in the legislation. Councillor Gazzola has put forward a deferral motion. Deferral takes precedence. Formally, he's putting it forward now. And that deferral is to continue with the process of going on record with each of these items, I know there's a little technicality. We really shouldn't go forward with it if it's going to be deferred, but it's to continue the discussion and vote on these items. I'm going to put a couple of words in your mouth. I think it's sorry. Continue to go on these in with the vote now on each item, but that the decision for approval and implementation be deferred to the 2014-28 Council. Is that correct, Councillor Gazzola? Okay. I've got two. Okay, on each individual, was it on an individual item, or if there are amendments to individual items, we'll take those when we come to them? All right, Councillor Galloway, Seelock.
I think this one is, like, if I understand the process we're going through, everyone's going to have an opportunity to vote on each one, but if I understand correctly, I know we might not be doing friendly amendments anymore, but with regards to one, it'll be a completely different motion, proposal number one, that might...
Well, that would be in order right now,
Okay.
because we're going to be dealing with number one now.
Okay.
So your motion on number one is what?
My motion on number one would be that we, proposal number one be approved, and that staff be directed to prepare a bylaw to amend the municipal chapter, basically the second paragraph that's under recommendations, so that we can proceed forward with number one immediately.
Okay, I'm going to ask Colin and Christine, we can take that one as a separate motion. It's clear, and you will have to fit it into the motion however it is. That one is the intent being there effective immediately. Mr. Wilmer. Or no, staff one, who is that? Who's pushing? Oh, for you, Colin, sorry.
Yes, through the mayor, that could be taken as we could potentially implement it immediately, pending the comments we made earlier about the impact on, with regards to the staffing of when the reports might be coming forward. As noted, we might need the shift.
Yeah, the intent is that it would be for the February 3rd meeting as outlined in the report, but that we proceed forward with that and not have to vote on it again on the 13th of January.
Recognizing that there is a transition time. Mr. Wilmer.
That was my question. That's dealt with now. Thank you.
Okay.
Second.
All right, there is a second for that, for proposal one to be effective immediately. So we're not going to get into debate on all of these items again. Councillor Gazzola?
I just want to confirm that that was my intention also, that it be dealt with separately.
That's fine.
And finally, secondly, I would like a recorded vote on all of the votes.
So done. And I'm sure that staff is prepared for that. Okay, clause one, proposal one, and that in essence be effective immediately, recognizing that there is a transition time. That's carried unanimously. Proposal 2. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. You're right. I did say I was going to do that. You're absolutely correct. And this is now dealing with Councillor Gazzola's deferral, as I explained before. There's no point in me going through that. This is to push it off to the next council. Recorded vote's been called for.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. I don't believe we have a seconder for that.
Seconded by Councillor Glenn Graham. Vote. That is defeated. We're now returning to the original motion and dealing with clause 2, proposal 2 rather. I think we'll deal with the matter at the end because we're dealing with each individual one. I think that would be the procedural correct way. So this is proposal number 2 on page 4, or if you're following in the last couple of pages. Motion, recorded motion is called for. So whenever you're ready on these. Clause 2? Okay, vote. That carries. Proposal 3A. Reports are strictly for information. They're placed under the heading as we dealt with. Ready to vote? That is carried. Proposal 3B. That recorded vote shall not be permitted at standing committees. You can vote. That is unanimously defeated. Clause 4A. Yes, this is related to the committee reports. 4A. Vote. What's the Jeopardy song, the sound? Somebody hasn't voted? You all got them now? That is carried. (4B). This is about special inquiry and putting that in writing, etc. You can now vote. That is defeated. What was the vote on that one? I didn't catch it. The number, just the number. Okay, thank you. All right. 4C. This is 11 p.m. instead of 12 a.m. Vote. Or I could sing, instead of the Jeopardy, I could sing Lullaby. You do have to have some humor. That is carried. Item proposal 5. This is 10 minutes for delegation, and there was I think there was an extra clause that someone was suggesting on this one. Who was that? Councillor Verbanovich?
So there would be an extra clause as determined that would allow us at agenda setting time for a major type of project to allocate more than 10 minutes.
Okay. Is that clear? So that would be an additional part of the first bullet. That is carried unanimously. Delegations 6A. There is an amendment on that one, yes. Councillor Davian.
Thank you. And I think I'm hoping the middle ground is that we permit everyone that shows up to speak, but those that do not register ahead of time, council wouldn't be permitted to ask questions. And I would actually ask, if I could ask quickly, if I need to apply that to proposals 9A, B, and C as well, or if that's encompassed by just adding it to proposal 6A.
Colin, do you comment on that?
Through the Mayor, it would be encompassed by including in 6A.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, we clear that walk-ins would be heard if that have not been previously registered, but there would be no questions from council. We can now vote. This is on the whole. That is defeated. Was there a part of it that we should have taken separately? I don't have a problem with, I'll just accept it as defeated, but I'm not sure what people were thinking when, okay? Defeated, okay. Proposal 6B. What's your question on 6A?
I just was wondering if these are currently guidelines or if they're new. I know we have on our website, you must register before, or we request or we ask that you register before. Do we not have something like that on the website?
Colin?
Through Mayor Zare, we currently request that people, if they want to be listed on the formal meeting agenda, need to register prior to the printing of the agenda, which happens prior to noon on Wednesday, so we ask them to register in advance of that. Otherwise, we can take their registrations and we'll provide a list to the chair as to any unregistered delegations.
I just wanted to make sure there was some guidelines for the public to continue to follow. If that's already there, then that's fine. Thank you.
6B. Someone not voted? Press A button, the one you want to have. Press the button. You can change as long as it hasn't been recorded. No. Yes or no? To 6B. Well, it would record if you choose not to vote. It's not a conflict, because a conflict on this system is that you have a conflict of interest under the McCuney Area Interest Act. So if you choose not to vote, which you can do, it's a no. All right? That will be a no. Okay. That is defeated. 7A, there were a few options that were discussed here. Just to refresh, it was 5 minutes as printed with the 2 questions, or 3 minutes, 3 questions, or just a blank 5 minutes. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I was going to propose that it be 5 minutes. I think that's a good middle ground and help makes it, I won't make a comment.
Yep. So there is a motion to change, and I'm going to take it as an amendment because with everything else, it's on the floor by virtue of the motion that was put forward by Councillor Davey. So this is an amendment. Listen carefully. It's an amendment to change this to 5 minutes, period. We will vote on that amendment, and then we will vote on the balance of the resolution, or the entire resolution, with or without that amendment, depending on how it goes. In other words, clause 2 and 3 would still be there. We're just dealing with the 5 minutes only on clause 1. That's an amendment. Voting on the amendment only.
5 minutes,
No limit on questions, but 5 minutes, and that is to include the answer time as well. That carries. Okay, now the clauses 2 and 3, voting on that separately. Yes?
Is clause 2 not really redundant? I mean, if we've given 5 minutes per person, what does clause 2 really mean then?
It allows a second time for people to go around. And
No, that's clause 3. Gotcha. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, this is items 2 and clauses 2 and 3 together. That is carried. Seven B. Ready for the vote? Just a second, folks, before you vote. Yes? What is?
That the balance of the wording around technical nature be taken out and that we only look at the first sentence.
We'll take that as an amendment. That's first. So clear the deck on the vote. Now, this vote is to delete the words "and should not be of a technical nature" and following.
Well, no, it's the second sentence. Questions will be limited to the scope of the information.
Oh,
that
I'm
was
sorry.
conveyed by
It's
the
the
delegation.
entire thing. So you're just leaving the first sentence. I misunderstood.
I mean, obviously, we're...
All right. Okay, that's fine. I understand that now. So we still deal with that as an amendment. This is for the deletion of the sentence. This is to delete the second sentence. We still would vote, if that's the case, if it flies, we still need to vote on the first sentence. Okay? That is carried. The 7B first sentence then, the remainder of that. can now vote. That carries unanimously. 7C. Sorry. That is carried. 7D, I think there was there an amendment on that one? Councillor Singh?
Yes, I think only if it's in conjunction with Proposal 10B, but if it's to do with just normal practice of whatever the agendas that are set or motions that are already written that were submitted with appropriate time, I guess so I don't know how that can be divided, but it may have to come back as part of Proposal 10B, so.
Okay, so we're dealing only with 7D now. Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, this is where I had asked that it be included that a 2-minute rebuttal be added,
Okay,
so that
I'll take that as an amendment, not as part of the original motion, but it would potentially be there, but we'll take that only as an amendment.
Mhm.
This is a 2-minute rebuttal time for delegations. Voting on that alone. That is defeated. Going now to the as printed, 7D. Someone not voting? That is carried. 8A. Ready for the vote? Yes? Yes, that's correct. It's unanimous. Yes, Councillor Singh.
I think it'd be appropriate that staff to include that in the minutes, that it's only for council, as it's not worded as such.
Yeah, I think that
Just for clarity.
I think what Colin had stated that there was another place where this says that that is the case, but it's for clarity. 8B. Mr. Wilmer.
Thank you. So it's Proposal 10A that talks about motions being made in writing, and the substance of 10A is about motions in writing. The substance of 8A really is that there be a motion before there's discussion or debate.
Yeah, this is 8A. Is simply a procedural thing. In other words, we hear a report, delegations, written recommendation, if it isn't there already in the report, and we do not debate it until the motion is on the floor. That's a procedural thing only.
So I think the question for council then is, do you want that to apply to council only or to council and committee? Setting aside,
I see what you're saying.
Setting aside the written aspect
Actually,
of it?
that's a very good point, because I think that, quite frankly, I think when you think of that, it's only the procedural, or the order in which things are done that probably should be applying to committee as well.
So again, through the mayor, if it's more helpful to council, you could delete the word written from proposal 8A and get to the substance of it, which is a motion first. You can deal with the written part in 10A.
Okay, so are we okay with the understanding that we delete the word written in 8A? That's correct. It's for council and committee. Consensus around the table? Can I see some heads nodding? Okay. 8B. You ready to vote? Yes. That is carried. Nine A. Just want to hang on a second. I got to read it again myself. Okay. Oh, sorry. Hang on a second, Councillor Davey.
Yeah, I have to bring this forward, otherwise I don't know how to vote. I would bring forward the same amendment before for these three items if anyone otherwise shows up to committee or council. They'd be given their 5 minutes to speak without asking questions. So that would be for all of items A, B, and C.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I'm not with you. Go back on.
Well, I guess I'll look to call in for clarification, but my understanding then from if we vote yes on this, if we approve these A, B, and C, then if somebody comes, for example, to speak about something that isn't in our jurisdiction, I would be saying, no, I don't want to hear from them at all. And that wouldn't come to council or committee. Is that right?
That's correct.
You have to tab him in there, Mayor Zaire.
Pardon me?
His microphone is on.
Sorry. Colin.
Through you, Mayor Zaire. If this is this process here, it outlines how to deal with requests that legislative services staff will get from members of the public who ask to be added to an agenda. There's a process in place in the procedural bylaws currently for persons who wish to attend who might show up at a council meeting, and whereby a motion is required to add them as a delegation if an item's not registered, if an item doesn't appear to be on the meeting agenda.
Oh, that's existing then.
Yep. These are pertain to issues that we've experienced where a person might come forward and ask for something to be added to council's agenda which doesn't seem to fall within our jurisdiction, or they might want to speak about an item prior to it's scheduled. Say if it's scheduled to come forward January 13th, and if they wanted to come forward, today or sometime in December, this would give us the ability to refer them to the January 13th meeting, as opposed to having them come forward in December and then dealing with it again on January 13th. It's more just ensuring consistency of the process for when people request to sign up as delegations or speak to council on new matters.
That helps, thank you.
Okay, so we're now voting on 9A. Sorry, there were two other speakers. Councillor Urbanich.
Well, my suggested amendment to this would be that staff shall strongly urge the person to the appropriate meeting. I think it makes sense that an item would come when it's scheduled to come, but a person may show up because they're going to be out of town or whatever, and I think we should still hear them, even though it may not be on this agenda. So I'd like to suggest that amendment
to 9A.
To 9A.
Colin, leave your speaker on.
There is a process currently in the procedural bylaw that does afford an opportunity. So if someone did happen to attend, say, tonight's council meeting and wanted to speak about a matter that we're not dealing with until January, by a motion of council and by the agreement of majority of council could agree to hear that person, even though that item's not on the formal meeting agenda. So this is mostly just dealing with setting out a process for when we receive requests for people to be added to an agenda that if it doesn't appear to be within the jurisdiction of the city, or if it's something that's coming forward later on already, then we would be encouraging the person to attend. And so it's just streamlining the process so that we're only having to deal with the issue once.
So you're saying that on 9A, because you're dealing with an item that is within our jurisdiction and is coming to a future meeting, we already have a process in place to allow that person to speak. So this is in effect redundant.
Through the mayor, what 9A does is that it allows staff to encourage the person to come to the appropriate meeting. Should the person say, well, no, I really want to show up tonight at council and I really want to speak, then we'll inform the person, well, there is a procedure in place that if you do need to speak to council tonight on the matter, you can attend the meeting. Council will be notified of that. A motion can be passed to allow that person to then speak at that council meeting.
Okay, but if I heard you correctly earlier, and I'm not trying to belabor the point, you said that we already have that process in place now, where you strongly urge someone.
We have an informal process in place right now where we strongly urge people. We have nothing written down or no instructions included in the procedural bylaw.
That's the difference. Councillor Singh, is this on the same item?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I'm still kind of confused that where you're saying that we follow the same practice already where we do encourage them. You're just saying is where you're seeking direction from council where we're allowing you to continue doing what you're already doing?
It's formalizing
okay. Well, that's fine, as long as where I think the terminology does include that they will be afforded the option that to be advised that they can still come before council if they so choose, but it will be at the discretion of council. So as part of that advisory process, they'd be notified of that, right?
So I think that can be worked in there because that's the intent, I believe. Yeah. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I'm a little confused. From what I'm hearing, this is instructions that staff will give when people want to come forward. What happens if the person's already here and they want to come forward?
Well, the same thing that our procedure would be that if it's not on the agenda, then we'd have to have a motion of council to hear. Yeah, if we did that, just being reminded, we did that once before recently. Okay, so let's go back to 9A. This is formalizing an informal process that is there now. That is carried. 9B, similar, has a subtle difference. Vote now. Only 3 more to go. That is defeated. Nine C. This is when it's appearing before staff first, not if they come to council. Because we always have that problem, or we always have that option. Okay, everyone vote? That is carried. 9D, that when it is deemed inappropriate through the agenda-setting process that a delegation address council and or committee, the clerk shall so notify the delegation and council with supporting explanation. Ready for the vote? Yes. That is carried. Last one, 10A, and this is where it was referenced that it is for it's for council only, but we don't have to necessarily put it in here. Is that correct, Colin?
Through Mayor Zara, I would suggest amending it formally to note that the written motions are just to be at
All right.
at council.
That's fine. So this is for council only?
Yeah, so it's not worded as such, so I was going to amend that, but if it's going to include that already, so...
Yes.
Okay.
Because that is the intent. Okay, ready for the vote? Yes. Oh, I said it's the last one. It's not right. Get one more. That is carried unanimously. 10B. This has to do with friendly amendments, dealing with substantive issues. Vote. That is carried. Congratulations, we got through it. We now need to have the overall motion, which is, well, if you want to vote, yes. This is it. This is effectively, as it was brought forward by Councillor Davey, that approval be given in principle to these things as we had voted upon them, and further that the council, special council, this be brought forward to a special council on January 13th. The timing is such, I've checked with staff, that is the evening which we have budget input. I would suggest that we would try to work a time that would be in the latter part of the afternoon, or we have early dinner, we start at 6 o'clock or something like that related to this. Timing to be determined, but that it be towards the evening. And then that actually the bylaw would come forward. Where's Colin? Colin? The clause related to the bylaw would not be needed then at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so the second clause is deleted today. Are we clear on that? Okay, so moving that item. Yes, there are two. Actually, Councillor Ioannidis is first.
Does this being special counsel, does this need to be seconded?
Yes. And I don't know if it was or not.
I'll second it.
Okay, Councillor by second. Councillor Ioannidis, thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just had a question of timing. As you just pointed out, this be as part of the public engagement process for the budget. Are we going to end up just arguing all these points all over again, or it's more of a ratification? Because if you're going to go through that process, it may not be an appropriate day to do it. So.
Well, I think the intent was to allow for some public input, and hopefully we don't argue them all over again, because all the statements have been made.
You know what's better than that?
Yeah, I'm hoping the council will take that into consideration. Obviously, we have to work on timing, and I think the timing you're going to have to leave at this point in time.
Okay.
Because we have it's apparently a fairly light day,
mm-hmm.
And that in the evening we have the budget input.
Okay.
Colin.
Through your Mayor Zare, just to notify council that the day has filled up slightly, in that at 6 p.m. there will be the Planning Strategic Initiative Committee will meet. It was identified by engineering staff that they needed about a half hour to go over an EA, which they expect, well, which they've notified the public, and so there might be public in attendance.
At 6 or 6:30?
At 6.
Okay.
And that was to leave a bit of a buffer in case it went a little long prior to the Special Finance Corporate Service Committee meeting on the public consultation on the budget.
Okay, so I would still say that we could be doing this in the latter part of the afternoon, early evening. But we will have to work through that time. So, vote. That is carried. Okay, thank you. We will now adjourn. Oh, sorry, we need to move to go in camera, moved by Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Davey. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Well, thank you. Colin, thank you for all your work. I didn't say that earlier, but a lot of what you had thought of is we've moved ahead with it, some not so much, but it is very much appreciated.